Good day. Well, welcome to what is known as midsummer in the UK. I know we British people are renowned for complaining about the weather non-stop. Well, I'm afraid if you could only see outside you'd understand why. Today is the 5th of June or something. The weather is just repulsive. I mean, it's just hideous. It's blowing, it's raining, it's just everything the summer shouldn't be. So I'm annoyed. I kind of expected to be at least a bit of outdoor weather, a bit of door open. But it's as bad as it can be, and it's going to be as bad as this for the next week, and probably more, knowing my luck. Anyway. What we've got here is Dave's vintage Yamaha SG2000, futuristic name. Just tune it up quickly. All kinds of clicks and pings coming from the nut, which would explain why it doesn't stay in tune, amongst other things. So really I'm just looking to just put this in tune, close to in tune, so then we can assess it. Ping. Right then, okay, so SG2000, this is the Yamaha's iconic equivalent or alternative to the Gibson SG, and as you can see it's got sort of devil's horns, but they are so different from the Gibson SG style, but it has the bulk of a Les Paul and a bit of a cutaway here for the rib cage, I suppose. It has the bulk, the heft of the Les Paul, but with a sort of bit of the styling of the SG, and kind of, yeah, it's more like Les Paul access to the frets up here, whereas the SG feels like the neck's floating outside the body. This doesn't have quite the same feeling. It feels more like it's a hello summer. It feels more like the Les Paul, and it's just a vintage old beauty. It's made in Japan. I haven't had a chance to research the age, which I will do at some point, see if I can find out what age it is, but it's got a serial number on the back, 71,839, made in Japan with Yamaha branded tuners, so everything's original on this by the looks of it. And it's got a bridge that sits sits off center on a bridge plate, and so unlike lots of guitars, similar guitars, the bridge posts don't go straight into the wood, they go into a metal or brass bridge plate, which looks a bit odd because it really shows up the diagonal nature of the bridge itself. But it's got a sort of Gibson style small post top here, and then the action is set with thumb wheels. We've got an engraved bridge stop post down here as well. I guess unlike the SG, it's got a raised pick guard, so it's more Les Paulish. And then it's got some unusual speed knobs with little pointers, which are kind of roughly pointing in the same direction. And it's a lovely old thing. And what I can tell on this is that the binding is gone walkies a bit in places. I don't really think you'll be able to see it very well, but kind of in here, you might be able to hear when I tap on it. It's a sound of kind of fresh air underneath the binding. So the binding is coming away in certain spots, but it's it's ancient, and it's seen a lot of years. Straight away, observation of this. By the way, the pickups are original, and they're kind of worn and have had some marker pen drawn onto them, whereas this is worn off, and you can see there's metal showing. The neck is showing signs of, I don't know what's quite showing, signs of somebody's lacquered over some holes actually. That's what it's showing me. It's got that look of yeah, somebody's lacquered over, touched up or repaired some big dents. But that repair is slightly wearing away, so you get this sort of cloudy, then shiny, then cloudy, then shiny effect. But it's better than, you know, it's better than actually falling into the holes on the back side of this. But it's had its fair share of knocks. It's got loads of sort of pressing marks in the back here from the belt buckle, or belt buckle rash, and a few chips here and there. But it's a beautiful little thing, and in gorgeous sunbursts, as you can see. So what Dave sent this down for is a refret. The action is currently set quite high. There's room for adjustment, so it's not like the neck is somewhere out of line with the bridge. There's plenty of room for downward adjustment, but what we've got is what looks like a very old bone nut in here, which doesn't quite fit in. It's rounded at the edges, so it's like it was put on something else maybe first and then repurposed on this. It's done the job, but it's left the first fret action quite high, but it's also incredibly sticky. It's constantly clicking and pinging, so it would be no surprise that this guitar wouldn't stay in tune very well. So the action down here is high, and then the action down here is high as well, and what I'm going to do is just take a few measurements just so we can get a sense. I always like to have a bit of a sense of what's going on, and then I'll write them up on the board. Just as is, we've got, it's close to 3 actually, 3mm at the last fret, and then kind of just under 2. So we've got 3, I would say 1.8. Is it 1.8? Actually no, it's close to 1.6. 3, 1.6, so it's quite a gradient across those. I mean, I in a way I don't need to measure, but I sometimes do just for fun, but it's not critical to measure the nut height, because whatever happens, I'm not going to recreate that. It's just really for info. Well, the great thing about this is when I posted a picture of this guitar, Hugh sent a link, or put a link on Facebook of I forgot the name of the guitarist now, but anyway, a great classic SG2000 solo, probably it was a live solo, and it was amazing that the tone, I was sitting sort of playing through this at the time, playing this through just a clean amp at the time. Was it clean amp? No, I had a bit of amp modelling on it. And you could really hear the similarity of the tone. It's not going to translate across onto the camera, but I will show you the kind of, give you a sense of the tones in a moment. Now I have managed to lose my, what have I done with it? I must have taken it inside on a guitar. I have lost my capo. I know where there is one, but it isn't here. So I'm just going to have a visual glance at the relief in the neck, and it's a fair amount. It's not overly massive, but it's quite curvy. It's quite relieved. It's relieved enough. Let's put it that way. But I won't. I'm going to measure it out. No, there. I'm going to have to lock this door shut. Do I have anything I clamp this with? Well, I do, I suppose. Let's borrow this for a second. If it will hold it. I doubt it will, actually. No, it's not going to hold it. It's going to ping off somewhere else. Okay, well, I'll have to go inside and find it if I want to measure it exactly. Why did I take it inside? I somehow did. Anyway, I would guess that to be, it's not, yeah, just pretty big actually. It's And I probably could just tape it down briefly if I had a tiny bit of my favourite friend, the Gorilla Tape. It's a bit wasteful of Gorilla Tape, but so anyway, the aim of this. The aim of this is to, that's just touching, that's fine. Okay, a quick look. It's not huge actually. I would say it's kind of coming up on 0.5, 0.4, 0.5. So not a massive amount, but it's probably a little bit bigger. But it's probably needed to be that way because I suspect the frets are choking out, and I think they are anyway if I... Hello? Anyway, so I'll just record it as about 0.4. And I'll make sure I find my capo at some point. It's usually hanging up there. Anyway, this thing, I've only got the small amp to play it through, but it's usually quite a good good indicator. Morris is running around. He hasn't noticed yet. Well, maybe he has noticed. Do you want to go out? If you go out, you're going to have to stay out. Go on. Ish. Our resident mouse, Morris and his sister, well, his sister caught a mouse, and basically it was so nearly dead that it was paralysed from the waist down. Mouses have, well, mice have waists. Anyway, its back two legs were paralysed. Its back legs were paralysed. Anyway, but other than that, it seemed quite healthy or well. Can't be in that doorway when it shuts. So, some of you may have seen already on Facebook that there's a new free strap. It's not cooperating with this just yet. So I kept it in a tank that I've used previously for rescues of yes, you want attention. I've kept for rescues of shrews, voles, and anyway, so I had that tank, and the voles had been turned to the wild, so I put the mouse in there, and amazingly, after a week, he was still alive and actually doing well. And after 2 weeks, until just the other day, he was nearly, I would say, nearly completely recovered. In fact, he'd regained the use of his legs, which was incredible. And then amazingly, the other day, a couple of days ago, while my back was turned to get a piece of that kitchen roll, he snuck out. He dived under, yes, he dived underneath the hay, straw, in the tank, and because he was hiding from us, I figured that he was going to stay hiding, and I'd literally turned my back, and in the space that I turned my back, he must have come out from under the straw and leapt out. And the result is, I kind of carried on feeding an empty, come on down here, I kept on feeding an empty cage for a day or so, until I realised when I went to change the stuff and check on him, I realised he was gone, which I'm kind of pleased about, except he's living in here, in the workshop. And I put some food down. Yes, I know, pay you attention. I know you're special. I'm talking about the mouse, but you're more special, okay? And I put some food down, took a picture of the bowl, and when I came back, took a photograph of the next day and compared the two, he or some other mouse had definitely been in and eaten a lot. So I can't prove which is which without setting up a camera, which I could do. Oh no, I've just made myself go on a project to go and do it. That's what I'm going to do. Anyway, so I'm going to set up a camera focused on the food dish, and now, because he's eating the food down there and I put a water dish down, now I've put his cage on its side so he's got straw, because I felt really sorry that he's sleeping in some corner of the shed. Found a little place to nest. So I put the original tank on its side so he can get in and out of the straw if he wants. And of course, cats are getting used to that smell in here, so they're whatever they smell. So they're not actually going crazy. They know something's in here. There's a little scar there which gets in the way of the thumb. But hey. How you describe those tones. Obviously clean and cutting. And then the middle position is, how would you describe that when you have the two humbuckers together? So it has a scooped sound to the combination of the two. It's going out of tune now. And then on the next setting, nice and creamy. The thing with this is you'll hear that it'll go out of tune again. I mean, even when I first got this, I gave the strings a few pulls, and probably more to do with the nut slots than anything else. It was going quickly out of tune. So a new nut, which will be required anyway because of the refret. Hear it pinging? A new nut is going to make a world of difference with well cut slots. So it's got a fantastic clean tones, like it, and then we can crank it right up to the land of dirty. I want to give it some reverb. Playing that last night with some friends. People gathered in their masses. Something like that. Molasses. Why don't you come up to the lab and see what's on the slab? I could show you my favourite obsession. It's got a definite 70s feel about it in every which way. I love this old stuff. Yeah, I remember seeing these on Top of the Pops, and I never had my hands on one. For some reason they're not that common. A few people have commented saying they used to have one once, or most people seem to have really loved them. Very positive. Why am I making echoey noises? never hoped to get it in tune with those nut slots pinging the way they do. Anyhow, it's all working lovely, and the job is to give it its new lease of life with a full refret, and that's what I'm going to do. And I love being able to do that to a classical guitar like this, and just kind of looking at the condition of the frets at the moment, it's very definitely worn. It's not, I wouldn't say it's completely dead. I mean, it's not going to get, probably not going to get a lower action without some sort of fretwork, and the action is pretty high, and that fretwork is kind of impossible with the frets around as old as they are, or as worn as they are up here. There's some pretty hefty grooves around in different places, particularly around this section here actually, so I guess it gets played a lot in this area. Again, typically none of them, the way I would say that typical, they wear the guitar out, the frets out, but it's not like that, because they're smooth and progressive, they're not going to, you don't catch the strings or anything like that. But a new set of frets on this thing is going to be wonderful. So I'm going to go with some jumbo frets, which I've already cut ready, well not cut ready, I've just literally snipped them off as a start point. And then I'm going to obviously make a new nut, or fit a new bone nut. It's going to look whiter, unfortunately. It's not going to have the yellow. I don't have any vintage material. I mean, one way around that would be to use a black one, but then it would have to be plastic. So the downside is this is going to be a slightly shiny nut. I suppose I could try and find some vintage nut material, but I think that would actually quite a challenge. Have to find something bigger and cut it down, and this obviously wouldn't be it. So, like I say, the alternative would be a black one, which would probably blend in a bit easier, but we'd be then kind of constrained to working with hard plastic or graphite, neither of which are my top 10 favourite materials. But you know, if it looks too odd as bone, then we'll go with a black one. It's a bit less, doesn't stand out quite so far, but the key thing here is to make it play the best it can play with the new set of frets. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a couple of close-up pictures of, so this is going to get a bit shiny and bright and stuff, a couple of close-up pictures of the fret ends with my phone, just so I can kind of get a sense later on, once I've pulled the frets out, I have some reference point to how they looked, or how they, where they got to. And that just helps me calculate, because I'm looking at them now. If I describe them to you up close, I've gone to video, that's not what I want. Looking at these things close up, because of the flatness, they're actually quite, there isn't a pronounced bevel on here, they tend to slope over a bit, but they're just a tiny bit overhanging on the binding, but hardly any, so there's no risk of them sticking out and getting in the way of the fingers. So when I'm cutting the size of them, I will aim to recreate that positioning as much as possible, just so that partly so they look similar, but also because I don't want them to be subject to sticking out. One of the things I've discovered after doing this a few times is that I was using the edge beveling device. I'll show you that now, and it's a kind of standard thing that you use when you're refretting and stuff. But so this block would typically be used when you have frets sticking out the end here. You would use the 90-degree thing, which is ridiculous because you're actually putting this thing onto a curved profile. So you stick a flat thing on a curved profile and you hope to bevel at 90 degrees, which isn't true because it's going to move. One of the downsides is it often moves that way and then flicks and skids across the top of the new frets, which is an absolute pain in the butt. But the worst thing about using the 90-degree thing is it keeps cutting until you take basically a thin layer of lacquer off the binding, and that's basically the only point you know when to stop. And at that point, your metal meets to the micron is flush with your slightly scuffed binding or lacquer. And even if you polish that up, you leave the two things absolutely flush together. There's no, they are perfectly aligned. And then all that has to happen is this fingerboard perhaps dehumidifies a little bit and shrinks in the winter or whenever, summer, depending on where you live. And then the tiniest movement between those two pieces, and then suddenly the fret end is sticking out just by a tiniest fraction, and it only needs the tiniest fraction of an inch or a millimetre even. And then suddenly, due to atmospheric changes, you've got what feel like sharp edges, and they can be almost immeasurably small, but your fingers will feel them, or your fingers will catch on them, because they are basically, they're sharp wedges or sharp chisel points. That's what you've kind of put on it. By the time you've squared it off and then beveled it flat, you've created a chisel, and so what happens is your fingers end up feeling that chisel as soon as it just protrudes slightly. That's probably a good way of putting it. So the way around that, I discovered or worked out, was to not use this aspect of it. And there's two positives about not using this square edge cutting part of it. And the first is that you obviously don't scratch. I no longer run the risk of scratching the lacquer on the binding, which isn't the end of the world, because you can actually polish it up pretty quickly with some micro mesh and a little bit of water. But you obviously have to have enough lacquer on there to do it. If you're marginal, then you can find yourself through to the binding anyway. But so the first thing is it no longer runs the risk of scuffing the edge in pursuit of a nice square cut. The second benefit is that obviously it doesn't end up with this chisel point absolutely flush with the edge, so that if I cut them physically or manually back in a little bit, then I only use the angle bevel, and that in a way that leaves me with a slight flat piece at the end, because it never quite reaches, how shall I say it, because of the way it works, when do I go as far as, it's hard to describe how it works, but it leaves it slightly short. It stops just at the point where you're slightly short of the edge. Anyway, that's the ideal thing, and so that it allows for this tiny expansion or shrinkage of the fingerboard, blah blah blah, and theoretically you don't get the sharp edges. When you use any of these bevels, you still get sharp edges on the sides, and that has to be manually rounded off, which my file for that is currently inside the house. So anyway, that's the plan. Now, before I start doing the refret, what have I got? I've taken my measurements, all that I need to know. I just know what it was to begin with. I can see that the stop bar is right down on the ground. Obviously the bridge is wherever it needs to be for the action it's going to be. What I can do now is I can take the strings off. I can put them aside because I'll probably need them just for one go later on. Make sure that's switched off. Keep them to one side because I could use them one more time for doing, actually twice more, for doing fret leveling and for cutting the new nut slots. So rather than waste a good set of strings or wear out a new set that I would prefer my customer had from scratch, I keep some old sacrificial ones. I mean, this guitar has lived, that's the nice thing about it. It's showing signs of its age, and it's got character. And there's a couple of little surface chips to the lacquer over there. And in terms of, if it was my guitar, I'd put a tiny bit of cherry lacquer on them and just leave that to blend in a little bit. But I'm not going to do that to somebody's classic, mainly because I'm not a refinisher, and I would much rather somebody took it to a refinisher and paid the ferryman for a proper kind of repair to that area, particularly if it's got a residual value that you want to keep, or make sure it holds its highest possible residual resale value as a bit of an antique. Can I get this off? No, it's going the wrong way. So just lift off the bridge. This has got Yamaha on the back and a nice little lyre sort of pattern on the front there, or on the top I should say. I'll just park him out of the way. Strings are dangling. So the next question I've got is, what's the state of the fingerboard? Sorry, I'll move you around. What's the state of the fingerboard, and what sort of amount of material have we got anywhere? So we've got these old frets. Feeling the fingerboard, there are some indentations, and it's very dark, whether it's a rosewood or it's a dark rosewood. Now the concern to me, and I can see the frets close up there, so I can see how flat they've become, and some of them are well over 1 millimetre on the tops in terms of flatness, and we've got some real string grooving going on here, which you can really feel with your fingernails. The concerns for me in terms of refretting this is I want these things to come out with the best, with lifting as little of this material as possible, and I want them to come out leaving the slots as clean as possible. So if it tends to be that almost all guitars can bring up a little bit of the fingerboard, flakes of fingerboard as they come up, and particularly if you use something, an easy glue, like an effective and easy glue like super glue. I found that I often, when I'm fretting a guitar for myself or for a budget guitar, I'll use super glue because it's really dependable. But it does mean that 30 years down the line that budget guitar will be potentially a little bit more difficult to refret. But because it's a budget guitar and it's 30 years down the line, it's not really, it's a trade-off between kind of ease of getting the job done and all the frets staying where you want them to, versus the risk of using a more forgiving glue. Now on this guitar, because I've got time, I'm going to use wood glue. That's the glue, because this tight bond seems to respond quite well to heat when you come to remove them. Aliphatic glue or something, I don't know if that's the correct word for it. Is that what they call it? But it says resists heat and solvents, but it's interesting. It seems to be that it softens a little bit with heat, but according to that you believe that it's not true. Anyway, it takes longer to set, which is why historically I've used or moved towards using super glue, whereas tight bond will do the job, but I tend to have to end up clamping the frets for periods of time, which slows the whole process down. But I'm not in a rush with this, so I'm going to give that a go. There are some constraints on a neck like this. It's a little bit more difficult. Obviously some of this neck will go through the fret press, which means I can get an even and very solid pressure onto the frets to get them to seat. Up here it's harder, and I have to use a kind of something, what am I going to call it, a batten of some kind to just take the weight. I mean, there's a good flat surface here, so actually you can use a clamping system, but I'll obviously cover it off with a wooden batten with some cloth underneath it, just so I can clamp against it. If this was a semi-acoustic or an acoustic guitar, it gets quite a lot harder because you don't have the solid, backing, so you have to really strengthen up. Some people use special tools that go inside the acoustic guitar. I often tend to build a frame around it which takes the load of the clamp, but allows you to still put pressure on the clamp, but it's still difficult. This isn't so bad because on the back of this one we can remove sorry, I guess the bridge will put off to one side. We can remove this. It gives us a very nice flat surface to work against for the clamping. So first step is to basically commit to doing it. We are going to do it. Yes, we're going to do it. Right, no turning back. I'm not caught in a trap. I'm lost in music. Is that the right lyrics? Anyway, so we're going to warm up the ironing board thing, the what's it, and I'm going to get some tools, or the tool, and gently pull out these frets. I think this guitar will probably benefit from a freshen up of the fingerboard underneath, only because there are some slight dents up there, and if we're going to go the whole hog of refretting it, we might as well make the neck look new. again, which will be, you know, everything's going to be clean from this point up to here. What was I looking for? I guess that's what I was looking for. One of the things to check is the radius of this. I can't remember. I've already had a look at it, but I can't remember what it was. We're going to check the radius because that's kind of important when we come to clean up or re-radius the fingerboard, or not re-radius, but clean up the fingerboard. So getting the right radius for that, getting the historically correct radius, using the right block will be really important. Now, I did look at this the other day, and whatever it was listed as, this guitar is looking to be a 16-inch radius. It's definitely not a 12. A 12 is far too curved for this guitar. I haven't looked, researched, but it's definitely not a 12. So the question is, it's a 14? No, 14 is too curved. Is it a 15? No, there's still gaps. And we're just showing that 16 so far is the only one that sits on here very accurately. And it could even be, at certain points, I'm not sure. I don't think it's a compound radius, but I'm looking at what appears to be a slightly flatter point right down the middle there. I'll double check it. If it's a compound radius, I'm not going to do anything to the surface of it because I don't have the means to successfully, in my book, resurface a compound radius. I'm not even sure how they do it in the factory. I mean, I'll do a bit of research on this a bit later on, but just looking at it as it stands, 16 is pretty close, even up at this end. And if I go to 20, for example, that we don't have anything in between. 20 is clearly too flat. If anything, it's a tiny fraction. Actually, looking at it flat on here, it's not. It's 16 all the way. As close to 16 as is anything. You can always find a gap by tilting it, but if you get both edges to clunk down, you're looking at a 16-inch radius. As near as damn it. That one is almost like a tiny fraction flatter at the end, but it's so close to 16 all the way that I would pretty confidently say it was 16 all day and all of the night. Right, so what we've got is we've got some frets to replace it with. Now the tricky part of a bound neck is the obvious. Okay, you've got a binding that runs all the way around the outside, and that binding isn't just a piece of plastic. It's evidently a piece of plastic that is then it's joined, it's fitted in to this whole neck, so it's kind of inset. So there's a little shelf or a rebate, or no, what do you call it? I don't know what's the technical term, but it's a kind of a cut out, and then the binding goes in. That's then sanded flush or filed, scraped flush with the neck, and then the whole lot's lacquered, so it feels like one thing. Obviously, when you come to refretting a bound neck like this, your only choices are you either take off the whole binding and replace it, which means you then have to re-lacquer the neck, or you work within the existing binding, which means you've got to be very careful that you pull the frets out without damaging the binding, which is pretty easy. But also that working with the existing binding means that you cut an overhang in your new frets to fit them inside, so you don't try and push the tang onto the binding here. You work inside of the binding, and you work comfortably well inside of it actually. If you work too far in, you can get curl up of the ends, which is hard, and you really require tough glue like super glue to hold those reliably down. Otherwise they can just sit slightly high. You can fret level them even, but it doesn't ever feel great. So ideally you will do that. The problem can be when these slots are full of crud or gunge. Well, the problem is cleaning them out, because you can only basically scrape within the confines of this, and it's very, very difficult to get right up to the edge and clean it out without damaging the plastic, because it's kind of waiting just to pop off, because it's only glued on, lightly glued on, and then lacquered, so you can't kind of get in there and give it a good scrape. So you hope that it comes out cleanly. You then have to work just with a blade as much as you can to clean it out. In a previous case, one of Malcolm's guitars actually, where there was so much crud in these slots, it was impossible to get a new set of frets seated properly. In the end, I opted to cut through or lose the binding, because then I could use a saw and recut the fret slots cleanly, which allowed the new frets to seat in. Then of course I had to fit a new binding and re-lacquer the neck, which was, because I had to wait for the right conditions, it then took a long time. So it's a Strat neck with no binding can be a joy to do, but most of the time I find myself working inside this constraint, either for a bound neck or in a Strat neck where there's already a nice end fill where the slots are being filled with something and then lacquered over into a nice smooth join. Equally there, I don't want to bust them out for no good reason and end up with fresh gaps. If I do, then I have to re-lacquer the edge and so on, and you can do it, but it takes a lot of extra time. So if you can work within the existing fills at the end and the lacquer that comes with them, it's so much better, or the lacquer that's been put on originally. So what I'm going to do is I've got my soldering iron running out of warm, and now this is going to always be the case, that as soon as I start doing anything with this, it's going to be right in your way and you won't see anything, because I'm not really set up to show you this on film. Ooh, it's a bit too uncomfortably close, but there we are. So the game here is to work with these fret pulling pliers and to start by gently heating a fret up using the this thing, soldering iron, and it'll very quickly transfer the heat through the fret into the slot and the tang, and it'll make them warm up pretty quickly. And then what you want most of all is you want a quick bite, which that wasn't it. You want a quick bite that will get under the existing fret edge, which was the second time I got it, but it's actually quite difficult to do. The first time you saw I sort of scuffed the top of the fret, and if you do that too much you end up having to work from the other end, because you'll never get it out from this end because there's no more material to bite onto. Now I'm just gently working my way down here with the heat and the pliery things, and I'm just using the pliers to just lever gently, sort of pressure up the fret, and out it comes quite neatly. One of the things I want to make sure, a bit of leftover metal there from that bite, one of the things I want to make sure is that my dimensions of the tangs on my new fret are as close as possible to this. If it isn't, what you often find is you may have trouble seating them in the frets because in the slots, because the tang is much wider, and also you can run the risk of having creating a bit of unwanted back bow in the neck, because the addition of all this extra fret material can tang width I should say, can sort of gently lever the whole neck into a kind of curve a little bit, because it has to accommodate somewhere. So what happens is the slot, it pushes the slot apart a little bit, and then you end up with effectively a slightly back-bowed neck. Okay, so that went under the edge quite nicely, and then sorry, this is really close and its fingers are right in the way. Now one of the things that you've obviously got to do at this point is you've got to be very careful of not slipping off the fret with your soldering iron, and that takes a steady hand. One of the things you can do to help you is to run it inside of your, make sure it stays inside of your file, and that'll literally stop it falling out. File, you know, chisel, pliers, whatever they're called. Yeah, if you kind of keep it inside there, you're still transferring heat, but actually you're just meaning that it won't fall off to one side. If it does fall off to one side, then if you are going to do a light sanding of the fingerboard afterwards, then obviously you can you can sort of just remove any bits where it just touches the top. And actually, when it happens, it usually only happens so quickly that you can pretty much lift it up. One of the things I was meaning to tell myself to do, and I'm going to do it now because I haven't done it this way before, so it's a bit of a weird one for me. I always do a right-handed guitar that way round, and actually it's a bit dopey, because one of the things I've noticed is if there's any struggle at all getting a movement on the fret when you come to get the first sort of bite going, if there's any, still I'm going to get you in the way, aren't I? If there's any difficulty, what tends to happen is you get a little bit of an indentation here. If there's any damage at all to the what's that thing, the binding, you can get damage. Now if you're going to do it, you might as well get the damage on the top edge, which isn't so much where your fingers are going to go, so it'll be far less, you feel it far less. It's just a kind of an extra insurance policy, really. Not that often you get to but if the frets really are low, you have to dig quite hard like that to get the first bite going, and then obviously more heat and we move along. If at this stage, if a great big flake of rosewood or ebony or whatever the material is comes up, it's probably worth at this stage being ready to get a little bit of semi-thick super glue and press it down on there, or put a little dab on there and pressing the flake back into its place. Now it'll look like a mess to begin with, but it will keep it filled for when you sand it, and then you have a chance of tidying it up quite a bit at the point of sanding it. Sometimes you'll see a little puff of smoke if your soldering iron touches a bit of finger grease or grime or stuff that's settled on the edges of the fret, so the heating process can just cause oily things to smoke. Obviously if you hold it there for a long time, the whole thing will start to smoke, and you'll actually see finger grease bubbling at the side of the edge of the frets. It's probably not ideal. So I don't know if you can get a close-up at this, but right up close, don't I have some better lights? Right up close on here, you can see that there is inherently a bit of scuffing around the edge of these frets, or slots, where they come out, and there's some tiny little, not gaps exactly, but little marks where the tang has come up. The tang has little burrs on it, or I've forgotten what the correct word is, but anyway, so you will get a kind of a straight line or slightly crinkled line with some little left and right indentations. That's the nature of the tang and how it grips the wood. Interestingly, there was I remember doing the very first refret I did was on a ancient vintage Fender Mustang, and I did some research onto, I did a lot of research into refretting, and one of the things that that the people in the know said online was with a vintage Fender before, I think it was 1973, don't quote me on this, but somewhere around then, Fenders before that time said something like you had to drive the frets out sideways. And of course I got all set up and I followed some guy's video, and I successfully drove the fret outside. Of course the guitar didn't have a binding, so that it was kind of easy to drive the frets out sideways. And then I kind of accepted what I read, that's the way you had to do it, and then I went ahead and refretted the whole thing, but it was clear that there's no way or rhyme or reason for trying to fret it by driving the fret in sideways. And as I was doing it, it even became apparent to me, as I thought it, you've got plenty of time, as you can see, while you're doing this, you've got lots of time to think this whole thing through, and I began to think, why did I drive it out sideways? Because some so-called expert in some forum and someone on YouTube confirmed that's how you did it, and I did it, and it worked. Well, it worked, but it equally would have worked if I'd have gone across the frets exactly like this and pulled them out. Now the point is, as you can see here, well, close up you could see that pulling the frets out pulls out, lifts them off the fingerboard obviously, and then it also pulls upwards and creates those little sideways sticking out slots where the little knobbles on the barbs, if you like, on the fret tang lift up, pull up through, same as they went in, if you think about it. Now when I remember pulling the frets on that Fender Mustang Music Maker, they also had little barbs on the tang just like these frets. In fact, they didn't look any different at all. And if you think about it, those of you who probably think these things through probably already know what I'm going to say, is imagine a clean cut slot, right, into which, let's say you press a fret like this, okay, with obviously a tang that fits in more or less into the slot, but with some barbs that go down either side of the slot and push their way into the wood to create a little bit of a whole extra holding, and basically under compression. Then anybody here guess what would happen mechanically if I were to then drive that whole lot sideways instead of pulling it back out? The answer's on a postcard. Okay, I'll let you think about it. I'm going to a fret with a tang with some alternating barbs on either side, one side then the other, and those barbs kind of are driven as you go down with the fret. Those barbs are driven into the wood, and then you take a pointy metal punch or something and you follow the instructions, and at a later date, like me, you then tap out a fret and you drive it like in a rail or in a slot. You drive the whole thing out of its own slot sideways until it falls out the end. What's going to happen to the wood where those barbs are? That's right, you've got it. It's going to just create a long channel, because that barb is going to push its way as you tap it. It's going to carve its way through a channel out until it falls out the other side, and several barbs are going to just kind of strengthen or reiterate that channel. And so by the time you've knocked the whole fret out, you've got a tang slot that was cut with a blade at some point. Now to the outside of that you've got a channel gouged by what were originally by some barbs that originally created a vertical slot, or series of vertical slots as they were pushed in, but now because you've driven them all sideways, they've together created they've widened the slot basically. And I looked at that and I thought, oh, that's a bit stupid, isn't it? So it's kind of one of the types of things that I just can't, no matter what angle I look at it from, I cannot find a credible reason for following that instruction, just because, ouch, I'll burn my finger, just because somebody in a forum says that's the way they do it on these old Fenders, and guess what, nobody ever queries it, and it becomes the way you do it on these old Fenders. So you drive them out sideways, gouging a deeper or wider slot as you go. Now of course it won't hurt it, you'll drive the fret out, you'll go, yeah, I've done it the way Fender said, and you'll think yourself deeply virtuous and all the rest of it, and you'll have a nice slot that was actually wider than the one that the original frets went into, because it's been gouged wider by your clever sideways driving principle. So guess what, you'll be able to refret easier because there's a wider slot and your frets will drop into it beautifully. You might need more glue to keep them in place, but it all seems lovely. So you go away thinking that was right, that advice was correct, and then kind of over the years you do 20, 30 more of these and you think, hang on a minute, why does driving it out sideways? And the first thing that I questioned was, hang on a minute, why am I driving it out sideways, but the only way I could possibly refret it would be to put them in from above? So are we trying to pretend that the original frets were driven in sideways as well? No, nobody's pretending that. It would be insane banging in frets from the side. What would be the advantage of that? All that would happen is you'd bend the frets probably and end up gouging the slot. It's absolutely, it's just a incredible pile of nonsense that really you only sort of uncover when you think about it long enough. And the only time you think about it long enough is when you do this enough. So, but like with all things, I stand to be corrected, but I can't for the life of me conceive of a situation in which that makes any sense. So there. So just warming up this initial bit first, getting the tang, or getting the crown up a little bit, and then kind of walking along, and a mixture of heat and gentle upwards leverage. The leverage is provided by biting with this pliers. I'm not even rocking it or pulling, I'm just doing a biting motion until the very end bit there. So it's a wonderful pastime. So far on this guitar there's one place with a tiny bit of a hint of lifting flake. It's almost impossible to avoid. I used to feel bad about it, and then I realised that after doing 20 or so of these, it's impossible to avoid. By the nature of how this works, the layers or the grain of wood is going to want to lift when it's glued to the side of a tang and you're pulling upwards. And there's practically nothing you can do, despite what people say, to stop it. And just looking at it side on, actually even what looked like a little bit of a flake is going to be hardly anything. So it's all together, this is behaving beautifully well at the moment. So I'm just adjusting my stance so I can be comfortable. Just getting warmth into that first bit and getting a sort of bite with the points. It's quite an acquired technique actually. I used to get into a bit of a funk at times because once you don't get it, you seem to then just mangle the end of the fret, scuffing off loads of fret metal and loads of little shards of metal everywhere, and you start to think you're never going to get that fret. And if you do it both ends, you end up going, how am I going to get this out? Apart from drifting it out sideways, which of course you couldn't do with this bound edge. That would be a bit of a disaster to try, but so it's getting to know what you can get away with that sort of bite at the end, because it requires some degree of force, combination of the sharp edges of the pliers, but also a certain amount of force to get that initial bite underneath the crown of the fret, because it doesn't really want to lift up, which is kind of a good sign of, you know, it's been fretted well. A little bit of a rock and a rolling there to get it going, and then you can go under. So what better to be doing on a rainy Monday in the UK, midsummer? We're about 2 weeks, if that, yeah, about 2 weeks from our summer solstice, where the longest summer's day of the year is 2 weeks away, and it's cold and it's peeing down with rain, and it's going to be like that all week. And yet, I know I sound so ungrateful, however, you know what, this is probably the most harmless, peaceful, safe, civilized in a way place that I've ever lived. It doesn't get in your face. It doesn't interfere with whatever you want to do. It's, you know, this countryside in Devon is harmless. It's peaceful. It's soporific in many ways. And I have to say that, come on, give me a bite here. Hit me. Even with all this rain, there is nothing as glorious, and probably because of its greyness a lot of the rest of the year round, there is nothing as explosive and life-affirming as the spring, as the trees come to life here in the UK. You know, and you have to, I guess, put up with the grey and the rain and the damp and stuff to get that sense of contrast. And I know that I've lived in tropical places, and I've lived in dry heat places, and I know that eventually you can get tired of the lack of contrast, believe it or not. I know we all dream of emigrating to living in the Greek islands or something, but you can hanker eventually for the sort of contrast that, in a way, quite naturally, one makes sense of the other. You know, the grey makes the green even greener, and so on and so on. Very zen and all that, but it's very true. And on top of that, it is still a safe and relatively civilised place down here, even compared to the stuff we see going on in London and Manchester, or any of the big UK cities actually. Even places like Cardiff, where my eldest son lives. You know, even any big city now is becoming less safe, and despite what the crime statistics show, you know, I guess it's always been the same, but the minute you're in a great big city, there are far more risks of burglary and all those things. And so far, down here, we are kind of completely free of that. So I will not actually complain about the weather. So, ladies and gentlemen, there we have the unfretted SG2000, and the fun part, which I'll do next, and I'll do it this bit while the camera's still running. We take the old frets, we kind of make a little bit of AMSR noise for those who love jangly frets. And what I'll do actually, let me just check how close, because I've originally set out to do this with jumbo wire. I just want to make sure that the tang is close to the same size. This is StewMac wire. Sorry, the stuff I'm going to do is StewMac wire, and it's not exactly very scientific, because these calipers vary in their reading. Okay, so it's actually, funnily enough, this original wire was actually a little bit wider than the replacement, although we've got it is jumbo wire. So what we'll find is this will fit in beautifully, and we'll do the holding work with glue. That's not a problem in that direction. My only concern would have been if it had been substantially thicker tang, which would have, could have resulted in a bit of a backbow problem. Again, that could be dialed out with the truss rod, but again, that has to assume that the truss rod is working, which for an older beastie like this might not be quite so easy to depend on it. I feel like I'm working on this left-handedly now, but I am, so just get over it. Now what we've got an interesting slot on here. It's different from many of the modern copy Les Pauls, because it's a bit more, it's a combination of a Strat style and a Les Paul style, in that it's a slot that goes into the headstock, so it's sunk both sides. Quite often you just get a kind of right angled thing where that's the headstock and that's the end of the fingerboard. This is a bit of both, so it's a little channel. Sorry about my fantastic hand signals. So what it means is, to get this off, I need to do a little bit of kind of loosening work, and I've got to be careful, because obviously I don't want it to damage the wood behind There we go, that was easy. I don't want it to damage this step of wood that isn't normally there. You can see what a lovely old aged piece of nut that is. Technically, if we loved this style, we could shim this by lofting it up a bit more and then recutting the nut slots. I'm going to look at the possibility of doing that because it would keep it closer. We've also got, look at this, the binding isn't fully attached here. I need to glue that as well. In fact, I need to glue it before we run into any problems with it coming off any further and breaking the lacquer down here. In fact, you can see the lacquer's already broken on both sides here because there's been a crack on this guitar where the headstock started to split away from the fingerboard. That's not a problem anymore, it looks like it's been glued, but what we do need to take care of is just this slightly flappy thingy, binding. But I'm going to keep that to one side because that is vintage colour. As you can see, it's a considerable difference between those two things. I don't have anything that old. It's also a little bit narrower than a standard one, but we could shim it to keep the original look if that were important. What I also don't have a spare one of, but I have got one which I'm going to use probably for something else. In fact, I am, because I've already carved it into a different shape. Is a brass one, and although it wouldn't be good for this one, a brass one wouldn't be out of place on an old guitar like this. And in fact, it has that similar kind of yellowy, goes with the gold hardware. So that's a possible. They're quite hard to work, but again, I've got time on this. So even though this is easier to do, and it's that lovely predictable material that I like to work with, in a way either of these two would probably look, or either of these two would end up being probably more period correct or a little bit more authentic in the vintage stakes, just because that's so clean and new. I don't think we could age it quickly. There probably is some sort of technique, but I don't want to mess with bone. But this is, you can see, this is ancient. It's yellow, like my teeth. This is a leftover one that I was preparing to use on my oak caster, so it's got slots cut where you wouldn't want it normally. If we were to buy a brass one, then I would need to work it quite a long way, and actually it's very, very difficult to cut the slots exactly on a brass nut. As I found out, hence why this one's still kicking around, because I didn't cut it right and therefore it didn't go on a particular guitar. So, sorry it's a bit long-winded. So what I'm going to do is I am going to get a little bit of super glue and I'm going to get it into this crack before we go any further, because if we don't, it's potentially going to provide us some worries. It's not going to be easy to get it in there. And I want to just, I'm going to try and make sure, so see which consistency we've got. So logic says a bit of low viscosity super glue would be great, because in a way you could get that wicking all the way down into there. This is a mid-range one, so I'll try that one. I'm going to put my X-ray specs on, and I'm going to try to find a blade to just give me a little bit of, a tiny bit of opening. Probably not even the right thing to use. Let's use a tiny bit of point of one of these cocktail sticks, which is the world's most useful all-round object. I just want it to just crank open the slot far enough to allow me. It is detached from the, what's you call it, that thing, lacquer. So that's by the by. There's nothing we can do about that. However, what we can do is just to be prepared for any of the obvious spillage that we're going to get. And I want to just be ready to clean that up. I don't want tons of super glue dripping around here, but we will get some because there is no seal. If we went with thicker glue, it wouldn't wick. That's the logic. Oh heck, this is mid-range. This is okay. This isn't going to run like crazy. It's just a guesstimate. What we've got a piece of plastic sticking out, and there is no longer any seal. So chances are this can run out from under there and run down the side of the neck through the disjoint, or the lacquer, with the place where it's not joined. The split in the lacquer is the word I'm looking for. Okay, so I'm just going to ladle on a bit of this semi-viscous stuff, and then I can take this out and I can hopefully just do a quick clean on the top. Again, I'm going to sand this down, so it's actually going to sort that out in a minute. And what I'm going to do is have a go on this side to just hold it in place with a little bit of pressure. And while I'm there, I'm going to try, conscious this might pop out and fire itself away. Okay, there's no obvious, I can't really see exactly, but let's just double check there's no spillage. There's no spillage there. Just going to leave it on with a bit of pressure. And that just will help us to, well, help it not to come flapping any further apart. It's such a brittle or such a delicate stuff. Once that's set, then what I'll do is I'm going to go across the other side and do the same thing. Okay, and I'll save you from watching that. Next stage for me will be to do a little research onto the material of the neck, which I'm pretty sure it's just a, well, it could be an ebony. It doesn't have much of the grain that I can see. It's not familiar grain, quite as familiar, but I'm not an expert. So it's either an ebony or it's the very dark rosewood. But I'm going to just double check the radius. I'm pretty certain it's 16 all the way. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to prepare I'll get a 16-inch radius block out, and then I'm going to get some sandpaper ready to just lightly refresh this. And what we'll find is down here, this will show up very quickly as a sort of pit or a series of pits here, and you can feel them. It's typical from the sort of acid sweat of the fingers, but it will clean up. It will clean up the top of this, and we'll keep going until we're down to a nice clean fingerboard all the way across. At that point, I'll also then round off the edges here, because they get very sharp when you re-radius the fingerboard, because it just creates this absolute razor sharp line between the vertical and the curved fingerboard. And then it will be a case of very carefully going over each of the slots to clean them out, to make sure that we'll get the new frets in securely. And then it'll be a case of having a look for a nut, which may take a few days to come in or whatever. But I think I think it might be nice to try and go with a brass nut. It'd absolutely suit this guitar, but as I say, it's more work. I mean, you can hand file it to a point. Let's just see how this is sitting on here. I think it is. Let's try this one, and that one's actually, even though there's a kind of clear damage area under here, this one seems to have been stuck down more dependably. Okay, I'm okay with that. It's as good as we'll get. So let's chuck this away. It doesn't, in any case, the actual binding here stops short of the nut in any case, and typically you would ideally want that lacquered over so that it wasn't a hole, but we shall see. Right, other glasses. Alright, so time for a break, let that set properly, and go off and do a quick bit of research, and then I'll come back and we'll do the radiusing fun stuff. Put this out of the way as well. So we're on our way. What I can do as well is take the SG2000. I've got a whole, what I call it, fly paper, full of frets that I've already cut that go on this, or that are destined for this guitar. And so what I'm planning to do, it gets a bit sticky, so I'll stick that to there so it doesn't go anywhere. So I cut them initially, in this case I cut them a fair bit longer, but what I do is I'll take my nibblers and my choppers and my whatsits, and I'm going to start by undercutting one end. So I cut the tang overhang. So what I look at is, let's lift you off here. Sorry. Hang on, spin you round, right round baby, right round, like a record baby. Hold on. Right, So I've cut a tang overhang. Ooh, tang overhang. Now you can see that if that was what I was doing and I was aiming to line it up, I'm going to sneeze in a second, halfway across the excuse me, halfway across, aiming to get the end of the fret halfway across the width of the binding is the word I'm looking for. Then you can see that in effect I don't really need that much overhang at all. I don't want to go in straight there, right, like that, because I'll be too close to all the gunge that tends to build up in the corner here in the slot. So really what I want is a marker, and I could probably even give myself a sort of guide if I just want to be precise. Let's take one of these and we cut ourselves. I'll cut myself a big chunky overhang to begin with, and then what I'll do is I'll use this to cut it down to where I think sort of the guideline will be. In fact, I can, if only I hadn't lost my decent marker pens, I could cut down, I could use this to give myself a sort of mark, to give myself an idea of what I'm aiming for. And then, so what I've done is a couple of things. I've taken off the gnarled end of the fret that you get when you're cutting the fret. So so there's no chance that it's twisted. So you've got a nice clean bevel, nice clean tang cut, a nice clean bit on top that isn't twisted or gnarled, which you will get on some of these, because every time you cut a fret with these things it twists it a little bit. But by the time you've prepped that, you can get rid of the twist and clean it up. So now what I've got is a fret that I can lay in there, and I can bring it literally, I can sort of place it with the very end of it in kind of coming halfway across. And then what I would typically do, although this isn't the actual fret, I would then go and mark the other end. Now this is a little bit over, and then I get the choppers and I cut to that line, and this, as I said, this slightly gnarls the fret. Mostly the tang gets gnarled, which is okay because we cut that gnarled bit off. So I don't know why I've just done the fret when I could have done it with the other one, but then I cut that off. Now when I place that back on there, first of all it will probably sit straight in nicely. That's the same, that's the first thing, if I can get it vertical. It sits on it, there you go, quite nicely. Sits on it nicely, and we're still a little bit overhung at this end. So long as the tang goes in nicely at this end, I don't really mind about the overhang, because I will file that back. But if it's way over, I can then make it a bit easier by just cleaning it up to a square edge. Although if I go too short, it causes problems. So that, just placed on there, that is absolutely perfect for the arrangement. Okay, so that's trimmed both ends, and all that we'll do to this fret once it's glued in is just put a bevel on it with this tool here. We could even do it manually if we wanted to. Okay, and so that's the process for each fret. I'll call that one a spare now, that's fine. But you can see that we're just getting it lined up, so there's no need for the edge beveling game at this point, which is pretty destructive. And the worst thing about the edge beveling is the ease with which, when you're doing it, because it's a flat block going over a curved radius, the ease with which it kicks over and scrapes this sharp edge across your new frets. And it's done it so many times I could cry. So the first thing I ever do is I take the fret, I cut off a reasonable amount of overhang, I come back to here, I check where it sits, and then I cut myself a square edge whilst leaving enough there to be the correct amount of overhang. Then I can place that kind of in place where I want it, and I can get my not very sharp pen at the moment, and I can draw a mark on it, which is a little bit crude, but I'll cut, can you stay on there? I'll cut to that mark, cut an underhang. Even if I cut slightly outside the mark, that's fine, because when I put it back on here and line it up again, I could say to myself, right, I can lose the whole section that's been painted on there in ridding it of this overhang, and I can then run that right to the edge of my clippers and take off that, and this one will then fit almost, well, a tiny bit over, but it'll if we want to, we can line it up again and just cut a fraction more back. And if there's not enough overhang at that point, then we can just take this nibbling thing and just cut a tiny bit more overhang and then replace. So it's really worth the effort in getting this to the right size prior to doing anything else. That would fit, that will fit beautifully. And that's 2 of ours done. If I could just get this one to stand up. With big fingers, it doesn't, delicate operations seem to be really difficult. Okay, so there's 2. That's before we've done any sanding and cleaning up the fingerboard. As you can see, there's a lot of grime there. If I wasn't going to do a whole re-radius, what I would do with a guitar like this, say I had to just leave this because it was a compound radius, I would take my little specially made, it's a piece of fret metal with a piece of, it's curved to it's probably a 12, a bit more like a 12-inch radius, but it's bent anyway, with some sticky back paper, sandpaper on it, and I would then just literally work it backwards and forwards over the slightly crusty edge of the slot, and it would just allow me to clean up the edges a little bit, and you know, you try and keep it to as smaller range of work as possible so you don't get, you know, ruin the kind of patina on the fret. Needs some new paper on it, but what I've done there is compared to that, I've now made that pretty flat and smooth. Could do it a little bit more, keeping it narrowly focused if you like, and then once I've done that, that will allow, the most important thing here is it's creating an crumpled surface for the underside of the crown to stick onto, and it would be much better to do that. So I would do that if I was going to leave all of this untouched, and in some ways it's probably something that's worth doing as I go, and then we have a choice as to whether or not we re-radius the board. And the radiusing the board is, what would be the considerations? Well, you know, is there enough fingerboard? Well, looking at this, it's a great big slab of rosewood or ebony, whichever it is. So I would say there's plenty of room to take a 1/2 mil, even no problem at all off the top of that. So you wouldn't miss it. Just making sure this is the right length. So this one, I'm now putting this one into the ready cleaned up, or the cleaned up surface, so it will, when it comes to it, it will actually sit a lot, when I press it in with some glue, it will sit really cleanly, and it's pretty much almost ready to go once we've just checked out that the slot is clear of obstructions. Whoops, didn't bite that one correctly. I end up calling for a spare. Nurse. That's not bad, and that fits alright. So that kind of immediately sat in better because it's not got any of the grime. Because you get quite a bit of, you can feel it's really rough where it's all the glue and grime has puckered over the years. So while I'm at it, I will go along and clean up each of these with this device, rudimentary though it is. This is how I tend to do it. Even though it's a 12-inch radius, I'm kind of using my thumb to, I don't know if it's 12-inch, I'm guessing, but I'm using my thumb to sort of flatten it out a little bit to get it to bite, and it just makes a smooth surface. And then all we'd have to do really after that is just oil it to darken it down a little bit. If we were just going to, you know, once we'd fretted it, basically. I wouldn't want to oil it before we fret because it stops the fret sticking down a little bit. Oil at this stage is never a good thing, but it gives us yeah, it gives us a nice smooth surface for the underside of the fret crown to adhere to. Exactly, and that's what we want. And so when it comes to it, when I come to fret these and press them in, I'm going to lay them out exactly as accurately as I can, and it's probably better to do it this way because I can line them all up on the leading edge where the fingers go, and actually if there's any trimming that has to happen with this tool, then we can sort of trim to the upper side, which is probably a much better idea anyway. Okay, so you can see, before I even go and do any fingerboard research, I can amuse myself for the next half an hour with this lovely, very meditative process. That, you know, this is, I love this because it is the future life of your guitar I'm working with here, and I love to do this to other people's guitars, and I love to do it to mine. And I'm a sort of standing joke for me on Facebook page is that, you know, if something stands still long enough, I'm likely to refret it, because it's just such a nice process. You can see a tiny bit of excess I can cut off here. So it's not rocket, I mean, it's not blazing speed, we're not rocketing along here, but you can see that it's pretty accurate and it's nice and steady. Like I said, put the radio on for a bit now, and this will keep me out of trouble for at least the next 30-40 minutes. And then we have, like I said, if I clean this up at this point, then we definitely have an option, because if I get back in touch with Dave and say, okay, look, do you want a re-radiusing of the board, or, you know, cleaning up of the whole fingerboard, I would say this doesn't need it. It will just make it look a little bit newer, that's all. And, you know, I can give Dave that option, and if he doesn't want it, then I'm ready to go with the cleaned up slots, or the cleaned up surface around the slots anyway. So it's a great process, as you can see. I love it. Lots of little careful snips and cuts and whatnot. Right, I'm going to save you from the boredom of watching all of this. I know you'd really love to stay. I'm going to switch off, probably make a cup of tea. I very much like the comment of, I can't remember the name of the person, but the person who commented on YouTube and said they felt these videos were the quintessential English presentation. You know, how, alright guys, how's it going, dudes, none of that stuff, but just good old-fashioned reserved Englishness, oozing with Englishness. It's kind of, it's about how it is, really. A rainy day in an English shed. There's not a lot of high-tech and high tensile dude stuff going on in here. It's terribly English. But I'm not ashamed of that. It's jolly good to be terribly English. Terribly good to be jolly English. Anyway, I wasn't even born in England, so I've learned it. I was born in the sunny Caribbean a long time ago. Which could be why me and some friends were jamming last night, and we quickly went from a version of Knocking on Heaven's Door by Guns N' Roses to a sort of nod to the Eric Clapton one, and then into So Lonely by the Police, and then into Ghost Town by the Specials, and before you know it we were ending up with Message to You Rudy, which we're going to all have looked at for the next time and do it with a bit seriously. And how we're going to get the trumpet riff at the start of Message to You Rudy, I don't know, but it might have to be a kazoo or something. Well, maybe we could try find a guitar equivalent, but anyway, it's great to hear that reggae beat, which of course is obvious because of my Caribbean roots. I do like a reggae. I like calypso, actually, the original, or I like old calypso. I don't like modern stuff, I have to say. It pegs me out as an old fogey, but I don't mind. A quintessentially English old fogey with a bit of strange Caribbean origin thrown in. But I ain't ashamed of it. Take me back to the soca hits of the late 80s, early 90s. I loved some of those, absolutely loved them. Upbeat songs. Wish I could play you some in here. But they're about, for somebody who's not a dancer, they were about getting a bit out of it, maybe quite a few slugs of rum and some Carib beers at a carnival and dancing for several hours and getting rid of all that self temporarily switching off the self-consciousness, which sadly I've never really been able to do when it comes to dancing. Typically English thing, I'm afraid. That's the English part getting in the way. But soca music at Carnival was a good excuse to do it. I used to love it. Anyway, enough of the blast from the past. But it was great fun to be playing. Oops, put that back. Playing some specials. Of course, the fun part for me was I was in Coventry. I was living in Coventry at the time that the specials made it big, and starting to kind of play in little bands, very badly, of course. And please, no offence meant to my fellow band members at the time, but we were playing at the time that the specials were making it big, and it was a kind of an exciting time actually. There was something about that sound. It was a concrete jungle, as one of their tracks was called Concrete Jungle, I think. But Coventry was a grim sort of place, but it did have this two-tone music explosion that was happening. And when you're a teenager, even though I wasn't completely, I wasn't all out into the scene of it, but it was definitely a sort of soundtrack to. Hey, I managed to cut my finger with something. It was definitely a soundtrack of my important teenage years, and used to sort of see them around Coventry, and particularly the drummer, John Bradbury, I think it was Bradbury. Yeah, he worked in the HMV music record store in the Coventry city centre, and I remember going in there. Probably instead of being at school or whatever he used to do, but I remember going in there and we'd see him, and it was that weird thing where you'd kind of know that you were seeing somebody famous, whatever that meant as a teenager. And certainly back in the the late 70s, famous didn't kind of mean quite what it does today. But there was this weird thing of looking sort of sneakily around the aisles of records in HMV and seeing him doing his stuff, selling records to kids, and we would be saying, "That's him. That's the drummer from the Specials." He's just recently died actually, but which is again a very weird thing when you get to that age where people you were making it when you were a kid start suddenly dying off, and it's kind of you're next. But yeah, it was a really. It didn't feel like a great time, it never does. It was very dark, and it was also the time of punk, which kind of Coventry was full of punk, as well as it was ska and punk really were the two things that stood out, and the two movements of the time. And I remember we played a band I was in. We played a little place in Coventry called the Coventry Climax, and it was about as seedy as the name suggests. But it was a dark, depressing kind of pub, just as they pretty much all were in the late 70s, mid to late 70s. And I remember we'd go in there to have a drink or something, and the tables, just all these tables were in this gloom, and they were like booths with a table in them, and you just see these punks all sitting around, and all you see is kind of Doc Martens, black Doc Marten boots, and this sort of various Mohicans and lots of leather, and then our band played in this little pub once, and we were terrible. I don't know. I think we had mildly punk influence somewhere in it, and our singer was a very mentally disturbed guy, a school friend, and he subsequently or since killed himself under a train. But yeah, he was a very unhappy guy, and his songs were full of, but perfect at the time, I guess, full of angst and anger and resentment. And I remember one of our songs was called "Kill My Ego," which sounds a bit Buddhist even then, but it was just shouted, most of the whatever words were. And another one was called You're Nothing But a Pretty Face, and I think that song was shared by our band and much better band, which had our singer's brother and a few other people in it, but they were much better than we were, and they did that song a million times better than we did, of course. That's always the way it went. But it was yeah, it was a dark time. It sounds like the start of the Star Wars episode, but it was a dark time, and in the midst of all of that dark punk stuff, and of course when you put the radio on as a kid in Coventry, really all you did was you put it on, you heard John Peel, and everything seemed to be a John Peel session, and John Peel could be, you knew it would be something dark and sparse and punk and, you know, very on the edge, always on the edge, or very reggae-fied, but dark, empty reggae, and it wasn't there was no Jamaica feel good to it. It was that sort of British dark 80s, early 80s, late 70s, early 80s reggae. Not nihilistic, but it was empty and it was hard. And John Peel was the voice of that and the sound of that. And really those three things: punk, that British reggae, and ska were the sounds of Coventry in the late 70s, early 80s. So to be playing the Specials last night was was really fun, or really evocative for me. Of course, it's the first time we've tried it, so we didn't really sound anything like them, but I think we'll have another go at it. Of course, the thing about Ghost Town is that sort of really slightly strange, funfair feeling that they got out of it, where it changes key, I think, in the middle of the song. Do you remember the good old days before the Ghost Town? And it's all sort of, it's got the same feeling as Mr. Kite on Beatles' Sgt. Pepper. You know, Henry. Wouldn't be surprised to see Henry the Horse appear in the Ghost Town, in Ghost Town by the Specials. Anyway, I do rabbit on about the olden days. It's funny because you know, I like reggae music, but I still don't like how dark and bleak it was. And if I hear any of that stuff from the early 80s or late 70s, it doesn't. It's very familiar, and you know, it kind of tugs at the memory banks. But I still don't. I couldn't say I like it. But by contrast, I do enjoy Bob Marley, because it's got much more. It has the warmth of Jamaica or the Caribbean, and it doesn't have the cold gloom of Coventry, and the sort of as the punks and the Skins and the Rude Boys and the, you know, well, there were just so many different kinds of people, and they're pretty much. I remember when we used to go out for nights out in Coventry, the sound of fists hitting faces was so commonplace. It used to be that it's part of the soundtrack. There was that in a concrete shopping centre precinct, which was the concrete ghost town that the Specials were singing about. You know, there was a certain echo to it, and it was so familiar, that sound. And you'd hear it all the time, people fighting. And it's funny because since then, whatever else has happened in the world, I don't see, never seen so much. Maybe it's, you know, when we grow older we move away from it or something, but I've never since been around that kind of edginess, and you know, and threat of physical violence. And maybe it still is in, you know, nights out in just about any city in the UK, I guess. I don't know, I don't do it anymore. I've long since stopped doing that, but it certainly was inseparable from the music, that sort of constant threat of some, it was usually some Skins or some punks or something would threaten you, and the sound of fists hitting people. The soundtrack to my teenage years. Anyway, look, I've rabbited on and we nearly cut all of these beautiful frets. So I'm going to go, and I come back when I am done, and by done what I mean is come back when I'm ready to press the frets in. So I'll have decided or done the fingerboard or left it as is if that's the decision. But no reason why we shouldn't just clean it up a little bit. So see you in a bit. Okay, so here we are with Dave's SG2000, and as you can see, we've got the fingerboard has been re-radiused and the dents taken out or reduced down so they're no longer there, which is a very nice way of doing things. So now we have the frets ready to sort of sit back into place, and it's actually not very difficult to see them kind of lined up now, see how it will look. I'm putting them on here just to double check them, but then I'll take them off and we'll get ready to do the fretting part of it. Now, as I said before, I'm going to do a mixture of, or combination of, using the fret press, which is over there, which I can do up to about there, and then after that I'll have to use a hand press, if you like, a hand press to finish it off, and or a combination of that and using a hammer if necessary. But we'll do it in three sort of sections really, because if I'm going to use wood glue on this, then I will want to clamp each section as we go, to leave it to dry or set or whatever you want to call it. So as you might be able to see here that the little chips around the edges of the fret slots, which is inevitable, as they're not really chips as much, but some of them are tiny chips, but most of them are just the little tangs, the barbs as they go down and come up. Most of them are covered up by the crown of the frets, so it looks pretty nice and clean actually. Just looking at this right now, it's one of the better ones, I have to say. So I'll put these on, and then I'll take a couple of gratuitous pictures just to show how it'll look. Everything's covered a bit in, well, I say ebony because that's what it said online, but it's kind of similar. When it's dust, it's a similar colour to rosewood, but it's ebony, so they say. So yeah, there's a lot of ebony dust around on the body and stuff right now, but that's okay, that'll dust off easily a bit later on. One thing about this neck is that it had, before I did the resanding or sanding the radius fingerboard, the neck was quite curved. In fact, if you remember from a bit earlier, way earlier in my world, it was too curved, more curved than we wanted it. So I straightened it out before doing the sanding, obviously. But even after having done that, there's still a definite difference between the two sides of this guitar. So the treble side has, I can't remember which side it is now. Let's just have a quick look. Treble side has a little concavity, and the bass side has a little, is flat, so you can't quite get it exact both sides. It's just kind of like that. It's just the way it is sometimes. And what we'll notice when it will show up is when I come to do fret leveling, and I'll have to adjust the tool from this side to this side as we go across the radius. But again, that's not uncommon. I don't quite know how it develops that way, but it does. So I'm going to just take a couple of pictures of these frets prior to being pressed in, and how nice it looks. There you go. I love frets. Okay, so like I said, this will be a case of a matter of, should I just put that back up there? No, I didn't. This will be a matter of gluing with wood glue. So to help me with that, I'm going to glue the first lot, and then I'm going to clamp them. So I can just just going to use some paper, some masking tape to mark just my own memory. I'm going to just mark where I'm going to go from and to. So I'm going to go up to that one in that lot, and then I'm going to go up to technically, but I probably won't want to do that. I'll do a smaller section, go to there, and then I'll do the last few after that. It's not critical where these fall now, I'm just putting it there for my own ease. And the last section. Yeah, what I'll do is I'll bring out a bowl of warm water. I'll have tissue papers standing around. So what I'll do is I'll kind of fill up, use a syringe, fill up these with glue, the slots, and then I'll clamp or press in all the way up to there, one by one. And then what I'll do is I'll then replace that with that and clamp that first lot for now. And what I can do is some people worry about putting crimps or putting fret shaped marks on these here. You can see it does do that sometimes. It puts little things on. It doesn't actually change the way they operate, but I could put some back to front paper on there so it can take some of the load, take some of the strain off there. It's not strictly necessary, but you know, who knows, it might help things along. So I'll do something like that when I come to clamp it. So I'll just use the paper side of this, place it on there like that, clamp it on the back of there like that, and then it just gives me it does the clamping, but it just takes a bit of the pressure of the individual frets off the underside of the block, which, to be honest, like I said, is quite a lot not a problem at the moment. It doesn't really make that much difference, but I'll do it for the purists' sake of mind, because people get worried, or they get hurt for my block. They're worried for it. So I'm just going to shift these things out of the way for a minute, spin this round. I've taken my white carpety thing off the top just now because it's covered in ebony dust, should we call it. Okay, so I'm just going to push this out to about, what was that just jumped off there? It's something I need, I know it. Is it the bridge? No, the bridge is here. I'm sure I will discover in a minute what it was. Probably very important, but I'll find it. Just have to pull out all these bags. Clamp. So the game right now is to clamp off this onto the edge of the bench. Just keeps it down so I can put some force into that. Then I will use the caul. In this case, it's going to be used that way around. And for this guitar, obviously, I'm going to need to feed this guitar in this way round, but it's obviously going to need to be lifted up. So to do that, I will get myself a block or several. Unfortunately, there's some outside in the rain, which would have been good, but I can do something else. I'll use some blocks to raise it up, and then actually I've got some there. I'll do, I'm going to do the first lot. I'm going to put my frets safely down here, out of the way, and get them out. I've cleaned the slots and I've dusted, or scraped out the slots and dusted everything so that all blown dust out of everything. So this is as clean a fit as we're going to get with these new frets. There's no cleaner. There's no way of cleaning the frets out, the slots out anymore. If there's any problems, we'll have to stop and rethink. But okay, so I have some blocks here. I will use some cloths as well. So let me just hang the guitar safely out of the way for a minute. I'll get some blocks up here to work as my prop. Obviously I'm going to need to adjust and work out. I want this to come through here in a neutral position. It's very close actually. I need this to be able to press down firmly on here from this position through to that position, and actually that comes in at exactly the right height. So what I'll do is I'll just cover it over with some toweling or something to help protect the paintwork a little bit. Make sure there's no bits sticking on the top of here. Now this is just adding a bit of soft protection for the body. And what I'll do is I'll just tip it around there like that. What I don't have yet is my warm water and my glue and everything set up. Let's just get this part of it agreed. So I can go all the way up to here, and then I've got to run all the way from there comfortably and run through all the way up to basically as far as we can get it, which is actually, you know, it's midway through the second bit, but I can't do any more than the one single block. So it's a bit odd. If I'm going to clamp, I'm going to end up with three bits because of the way this works. So I can do the first lot, and then I can get right up to where can I stop? I'm going to stop right here. I can get up to this one with the second block, which is actually, it leaves me 4, and then I do the next lot separately from that. So it's a little bit odd, counterintuitive. Two uneven sets of, 3 uneven sets of frets I'm doing. That's just fallen off, isn't it? No, it's there. So I'm just going to add a bit more to make sure it stays in place. Okay, so next thing, I'll go and get some warm water for clean up. And the warm water is because the glue tends to go everywhere on this business, in this business. So it's always needs to be ready with a clean up straight away. Okay, that to there, that to there. Just double check it one more time. That's my first set there. Yep. The second set will be that block there, and the third set will be independently that block there. Right. Okay, I'm going to stop you a minute, and I shall come back when I have some water. And I'll also need some glue and a syringe, which the syringes live here. I'm going to see, I've got these hypodermic needles, which are probably possibly a bit on the extreme fine side of things, but I'm going to see if it makes it any easier. The nozzle like that probably works as it is, but I'm going to see if this would be nice if I can actually cut that wider, or use a wider gauge, but I think this is the widest one. I mean, in a way it would make it a lot neater if I could get glue into there. I mean, there's a way of trying it out. Otherwise we use the slightly messier version. But let's give it a test. I still need to go and get water and a cloth. for the clean-up purpose. So, oh dear. Of course, I've got a clogged up nozzle. Blade. Yeah, so when I went in just now to download some video, I had a chance to grab, record, get hold of Ghost Town by the Specials, and so I can get onto learning it. Okay, this is coming out, and it's very unmessy. I'm just kind of, it's so slow, I don't know if I'll ever actually get enough in there to do it. So let's put a load of, let's put a load of glue into the slot. But while it's incredibly tidy, and in fact I'm just going to immediately forget which one I squirted it into. Now I can see that one. It's very, very tidy. Let's just see if it actually spits any out the side or not, i.e. whether it's practical, whether it's got anywhere close to where did I put it? It's there. Okay, so not really a good example, but let's just give that a press down. That's the wrong call anyway, but yeah, I mean it's a tidy way of doing it, assuming that it actually went all the way or filled up enough in the slot. It's probably going to be better to make a mess and squeeze a bit more than we need in. So I'll give you another example of what that would look like. This is the 16 call as it happens. That's not 16 radius neck, that's why it didn't clamp very well. We've got slightly super glued up clamping core here, so it might just benefit from a bit of a quick scrape just to clear the concave shape of it a bit, so it'll grab the frets or squeeze the frets properly. Probably needs a sort of going over with super glue debonder to get the last of it out. So I'll lift this one out. I mean, actually it's not a bad grip. You know, if you it is on the what's it, and it's very tidy. Let's see what happens if I do one without, using the same thing, and yeah, woohoo! I mean, that's what I usually end up playing with, and then I've got plenty of clear up to do. And then there's a matter of basically squidging it into the slot. But the advantage of this is, of course, when you put the fret in, although it's a complete mess right now, when you put the fret in, the fret goes in and then squeezes down on top of, squeezes down on top of, presses the crown of the fret onto glue. So that's really ideal, because that sort of creates a little film of glue underneath the crown, which all goes towards holding it nicely in place. So I would prefer that rather than just glue in the slot. If I could squirt super glue, medium, this is just so difficult to get out. If I could squirt medium viscosity super glue into the slots without any spilling anywhere, I might be tempted to do that. But okay, so that's a good thing, and typically what I'll do, usually with the super glue one, because it needs more, or it tends to set pretty quickly. Just put it on a little clamp there. so that can just hold it. And then normally what I'll do is run along with cloth and pull out as much leftover wood glue. But of course wood glue is much more forgiving in terms of its setting time, hence the clamping and stuff. So I've got a lot more time to clean this up. So typically with the glue approach, the system needs a bit of changing because it's getting really stuck. A bit temporary. So yeah, with the glue method, I usually then have a bit of water here, and I've got a chance to clean up. And water on the ebony or the rosewood board cleans up really nicely, and then we can also just clean up the sides as well if there's any spilled out. But that way is pretty good because that now has a little thin layer of glue under there as well, and then by the time we come and clamp this whole lot for an hour or two, then it's got as good a grip as it's going to get. Obviously the radius is not the same on this. I'm sticking 16-inch radius frets on a 12-inch radius neck, but even still, you know, that went in quite well. That you can see where it's got glue, a little tiny bit of glue all the way along that edge, which is kind of what we want. It's also, this is quite soft, so it also presses in a little bit as well, which is not a problem. Okay, so that was just a sort of test. Oh, cool, I don't want to do that. That was a little tester. I'm going to go and get some water and get prepared for this. Move things out of the way, and I'll see you in a minute. Yeah, well, I thought I'll give this a go without the usual bowl of warm water, you know, and pretend that it's not. We don't actually need warm water to do this. We can do this. We can do this with cold water. We've got a wet cloth, cold water. Now, there is a what's the word? I'm going to drag this back using, or so that for now the strap button doesn't sit up on here and cause it to rock, because I'd like it to be a nice sort of firm thingy. Now I'm just going to line this up first. I'm going to go directly down for a moment, just gently on top of the slot, and make sure that if I need to do a little bit of movement, I push this round in just a tiny angle. I want to get this lined up as, I've got a bit of glue on there now. I want to get this lined up as well as possible. And again, I've gone a bit too far that way now. I'm going to line this up as well as possible. Looking the other way, or am I about right? A bit more. That's about right. Careful with these, because even if you just test place them, you can run the risk of crimping or making a line, getting a line down the side. Oh, there goes my light. It was good. It's really not happy. That's kind of certainly right for putting it on the edge of a curvy thing. It's not a good thing. I think I'm going to need to get a new bulb. Oh well. Let's just put it out of the way then, shall I? Yes, let's. Out of commission. Okay, so I'm getting lined up to do the first one, which is back there, and I'm going to get me a bit of the old glue. Oh, squish straight over the edge, and it's a mess. It really isn't. There's nothing precise about this system at this point in time, so I'm just going to work with glue, keep everything wet and keep it moving, if you get what I mean. So here we have the glue, plenty of it. Paper down there. I've got a wet cloth here. What I'll do is, first of all, with a bit of paper, I shall just take off the excess. gently, and that just makes things a bit easier to work with. What I'll then do is pick the first fret, place it in place, and I want to make sure I line it up exactly where I want it, which is there, and then I'm going to line up my call and missed completely the first time. Just push that through a fraction, and then push it down. So what I can do at this point is I can put it on a bit of a clamp, just keeps it in place, and then with my plastic thing I can do a quick sort of scrape to get the excess glue off. It's quite intensive when it comes to use of tissues. It can be quite heavy duty, but it's okay. It keeps keeping everything clean, and then just get ready with the wet cloth to take off any more stuff. So it's keeping the glue wet helps it a lot. Now, since I'm going to thingy this, what's the word I'm looking for, clamp all this, I'm just going to quickly go in there with the wet cloth and just get rid of everything that's lying on the surface. Just tidy it up and down the side. So there we have a nicely pressed in fret ready to go. So I've got my wet cloth there, my messy glue here. What I could do just to keep this moving is I could just put some glue on all of these frets in my first line, and as long as I keep it all as long as I keep it all wet and all the glue in movement, if you like, then we'll be okay. And it's easy to clean off. It does come out with water. I'm just, as you can see, I'm just want to get the slot filled as best I can. It's all contained anyway within that between the binding, so it's not going anywhere. Once it sits in there, it's not going to come out the sides. It can come over the top obviously, but you can hear the rain hammering it down here still. So just going up and down, just want to make sure that glue goes right into these slots, and then in this case I'm just going to take off the excess, leaving a bit on the surface. I do want the crown of the fret to have something to bite on, so I pick up my frets, place them precisely as I actually can, press them in. If you had I have a hammer, and you could, if you wanted to, you could just tap them in at this point before you clamp them, to your own personal choice. I'm just going to get these four in as close as I can to their correct position. Move them along a bit. One more. And then what I'll do quite quickly before I do anything else, when I've got this in place, is I'm just going to get the wet cloth. I'm just going to run up and down quickly on here just to wet this up again so nothing gets too sticky. And then I can feed the neck into here, get lined up again on the caul, squish that one down, and keep moving along. Just check the end where we are on the guitar so there's plenty of support for it. Press this one down, keep moving in, press that one down, keep moving in. Again, check the guitar, we've got loads of room. Press that one down. So I'm pulling back to here, and I'm going to get rid of the excess again at this point in time. So it's just a matter of keeping that wet as we go, and it's easy to clean up then, and then the glue underneath can dry at its own pace. A bit of wet clean and then a dry mop up, help it clean up, and clean up caul as well while I can. Okay, so I'm 2 frets away from the first clamping, so I'm just going to bring this whole arrangement forward a bit because I want to make sure I've got the transition room, and then a bit more glue in here. I want to get it clamped before too long, so what I'll do then is once I've clamped the first set I'll just leave them. I've got other things to be doing. Namely, I'm going to do a little bit of reshaping to my headless oak caster, which is a shame because it's playing so well. I don't want to take the strings off it even, but I do want to. It's got a bit of a rough cut near the end where the sort of the headstocky thing, it's not correctly a headstock, but where the headpiece is, and I want to be able to finish it off with a nice thick layer of lacquer instead of leaving it slightly a bit of wood poking out, which is where it's at. Doesn't matter to me because it's just what I play. It's my own guitar to play, if you see what I mean. But I don't. You know, it may be that I'll sell it and keep the other one. But since I've got two, it's a terrible thing to say because the second one has got the rail hammer pickups, which, much as I would so love to keep them and have them on my own guitar. Right, just line this up. Come on, straighten up. Come on. The stretchy bungee thing, I have to say, is mostly useful when I'm doing super glue because it lets me very quickly clamp for about the 20 seconds each one needs in order to be fixed and done. You don't need much longer than that, which is the benefit of the upside of using super glue. And as I said, on budget guitars it's absolutely fine, but it's not something I'd want to do. I want to get a vintage guitar like this. I would like this, obviously I'd like these frets to be able to be removed at a later date by somebody who wants to refret it, and if I were to do it with super glue it would just make that process a little harder. So I'm just going to lift this up, put these out of the way for a moment. It's like having one of those ovens in the TV studio. Here's one I made earlier, and I'm going to just lower, well, I was going to say I'll put that in there, but I can't exactly put that in there for a second, but I'll put this. I'll put that on there, everything in place. Am I happy with everything? What I'm going to do, just in case you aren't, is get the little rubber hammery thing, and if anything looks like it's fractionally out of place, just tap it a fraction. I don't know if it's doing anything, but I'm just going to see if it just moves it along a tiny smidgen. Everything else is fine. Yeah, and then I'm going to put this stuff over here as a kind of protector, and I'm going to put that on there like that, which is my 16-inch block, and then I'm going to get some chunky. I used the wrong one. Okay, this is the bit that gets quite fun because I'm going to use my fourth arm to just line this up, get it clamped on here. And sort of try and get the thing in dead center position, because if you do, it will bite without rolling. That's what I want. Stand that there. I'm going to free up this one. It's good to have two the same. I'm just going to put that on there, push that one down on there. So it should be a nice solid clamping on these. Just going to look, that's a little bit off to one side, but it's still clamping a 16-inch radius. I might want to just move it, see if I can just move it around a little bit. Yeah, man. It's a top that needs to stay still. Don't want it to drop all the way out like that. It's very annoying to have so many things moving at once. You can see it's a pain. We're floating, everything's floating badly. I'll put that on there. I can hold that one still, but the other one moves. little bit. Line it up. Okay. So this is now sitting on, resting on these clamps, which is fine. As you can see, it's not going to go anywhere, and I'm going to leave it there for now. What I'll probably do is place it somewhere else in a minute. I'll put somewhere nicely safe together for it. It's quite comfortably clamped. Just checking everything's in the right place, nothing untoward. So this will probably, I want to leave this sort of 2 to 3 hours, 4 hours maybe even. So just at the very tail end of tonight, I may do that section and then clamp that overnight, and then tomorrow do this section, which will be the last bit. So there we are. And then we're tomorrow. Then once tomorrow evening sometime, then it'll be time to put the bevel on there. We're going to struggle to get anywhere near these frets here, so I'll have to do this by hand, which is not impossible. It just takes a little bit more time, and I may need to remove the scratch plate in order to do it, because there's not enough room. I had a look, well, I'll have a better look later on, but I had a look online for some unbleached bone nuts for this guitar, because it really be nicer than a what's the word, bright white one, and better than a black one. So I will be having a look and see if I can get one in, in good time. There are quite a few blanks I can get for this, but I don't want to be cutting one myself if I can help it, because it's actually very difficult, even with rulers and measurements being correct. It's still quite difficult to actually cut accurate spacings. It's quite a challenge. Not impossible, but a challenge nonetheless. So there we are. That's the first set clamped in and ready to set. This by the way, is a sustain plate for the bridge. So it's a nice chunk of brass. I guess the idea is that it helps to spread the maybe, I don't know, helps to make a more solid platform for starters, but what else it does other than that depends on what you believe about the way the wood of a guitar resonates and the role that plays in the actual tone that ends up coming out through the pickups. Who knows? Long discussion, one that's currently ongoing on my Facebook page as we speak. Okay, so I'm going to find somewhere else for this. I'm going to get on with my stuff. So I'll see you later when this is done, probably for the later section later on, or maybe for that one tomorrow. Bye for now. Just a quick update to show you where we are. I'm just kind of lined up this Yamaha SG2000 in a sort of jigged position. So what I'm aiming to do is to get into these frets here and clamp them by hand, and to do that I use my little custom, sorry, it's so windy out there, my little custom built clamping block with the, oh Morris, what are you doing? With the insert with a clamp, again with some Velcro. This guy's crazy because the wind is blowing like mad out there. Anyway, you'll see that the guitar is supported on an oak shelf, protected. The neck is in a caul which is lightly strapped on, so it's supported. And then what we've got here is a little block of wood and a exact amount of post-it notes. And I've taken the strap button off the back of the guitar, so it's got a flat surface on the back at the moment, and that allows me then to get in here and to clamp comfortably and put plenty of pressure on here, because it's supported directly underneath here. There's a little bit of place here where it isn't supported, but it's supported there and there, which is absolutely more than enough on this great thick body, and then it's held in place by these various wires and pulleys, and it moves around so I can adjust and get to it, but the whole point is that it's designed always to sit with this tail end on the bench, as long as I don't do anything silly and push it that way at 1,000,000 miles an hour. And it's just lightly held on in that way down here. It doesn't need to be fixed on, but it's safe on this thing, and it's really the main thing is about supporting this so I can get into there. Now I'm going to need to clean off caul. Oh, that's the wrong one. I need to trim off the caul before I attach it to here. So the idea is that I might put some more Velcro on here actually, it's getting a bit worn out, but the idea is that I Velcro it on here and then I will line up my thingy and go like that. In fact, I might be advised to do it on the larger ones since I've got larger clamp. And they've got a bigger reach, so something like this allows me to get right in over the piece I'm working on. So I can put the Velcro on the last part of that, which is right under the pressure point, which is really cool. And I've got loads of Velcro, so I can afford to do that. Morris is in here still looking for the original mouse, because currently we have a second, what I think is a second mouse in the mouse tank, recovering from being caught, actually brought in by Morris last night. So now what am I going to do? I'm going to have it upwards or downwards. What do I feel is the best thing to do? Upwards or downwards? Downwards. I don't know why, but it feels right. So I'm going to pull off the wiry Velcro bit. I'm going to line it up first on our thingy here. I'm going to take that off, and I'm going downwards, so I'm going to put it close to the end of the block, and just pull this off, and then we can just scrunch that together to keep it stuck on for a minute. I'm going to give this a clean with whatever that stuff is, you know, super glue remover. And once I've done this, then I'm going to put this guitar back indoors to let the frets sort of set in place, and then it won't be a major problem or challenge then to do the next bit, which is beveling the edges to 45 degrees. That's quite easy to do because they're nicely trimmed already. Now, one of the things that changed in this process is I changed my plan along the way. The first set of frets I put in with wood glue, I'd forgotten in a way because I hadn't done it for so long with wood glue, I have to say. They just didn't grip as much as I'd liked, and it's partly because I think the original frets seemed to be a little bit wider. Now you can get a little tool for extending the reach of your fret tang, or the width of your fret tang, and I don't have that little tool, so I decided that to enable this to work I needed to make sure that the slots were better glued than the wood glue was allowing. It just was at the edges, it wasn't seating quite the way I'd like, and the great thing about super glue is it really does hold those edge pieces down nicely. It does what it kind of says on the tin, really. Anyway, so I did that instead. So I pulled the first set of frets, which there were only 6 or 7, but you know, it's a waste in one way, but actually I'd much prefer to get it right than to struggle onwards. So the first immediate impression was it wasn't the way I'd like it. Okay, so I'm not going to take you through the whole of this, but I'll give you an idea of what will happen. So I got my frets here, the remaining frets, and I'm going to dab a tiny bit of super glue right at the end, so the overhangs get a chance to get pulled down and stuck, and then obviously line that up. Now I could technically just tap these in with a hammer, they would probably work. In fact, I could probably tack them in with a hammer first and then clamp them as a sort of insurance policy for 5 minutes. But what I'll do is I'll put that on. I think you can see all right. I know the door's a bit bright. Hang on, let me shut the door, sorry, because I annoy people. Just for a moment, until the wind blows it open again. Yeah, so the way I'll do it is this, and then I'll place my brass insert over that, and then I'll basically clamp down, and we'll leave it like that for 5 minutes or so. It's kind of the same as using the downward thing. It's obviously less convenient, but we can get all the way comfortably to there, especially with the reach of this thing. And actually when we get to that end we can turn it so we can reach right in to the last fret. on this kind of guitar, which is good. So another brilliant use of Velcro, if I may say so. And I know StewMac makes an expensive tool. It runs at around $230 US or something to do the same task. And I know it's more convenient, a little bit more convenient, but you know, it's 230 bucks. So if you've got the money, great. But if you don't, you have to kind of improvise a little bit, like I'm doing here. So what I'm looking for first off is the fairly viscous super glue, which is this. So I'll just do one and then I'll go off camera. So what I'm doing is I put my fret down there, I take yonder super glue and I'll put a tiny little dab on the overhang spots, and that's what I just concentrate on, making sure there's a little spot of glue on those places there, because we want that to kind of keep that little edge bit down. And then I get a bit of extra glue and then I sort of dab it onto the tang in a couple of different places either side. I don't need a huge amount, and I don't want too much. In fact, I'd rather it was spread thinly but evenly than too much everywhere in any one spot. The trouble with super glue is 30 years from now, when you come to refret this, it does tend to want to hoik out a bit more material from the top of the what's it. Now look, just for an example, I can take my little fret hammer here and just tap that in for a start of a 10, which is kind of nice because you can locate it first, and then I can just slide this on, feel that it's in place, and then I can give it a squeeze to hold it. It doesn't have to be mega pressure. We're not trying to let me just check something a minute. Okay, who just fell onto the roof? Who is on the roof? According to that, nobody. Nothing. Nobody and nothing. How strange. Very windy down here. So what you get with this is you get a bit of a splurge of the super glue either side, and you can clean it up as you go. The main concern would be to stop it going if there's any that runs the risk of going on the sides, because we don't want that getting down to the paintwork. But then I hold this so it doesn't spring out too much, and then we can take a close-up look, and we clamp it again, a bit harder if we need. But a quick look at this shows it's seated quite nicely. Could do a little better at the ends, and if I'm sure it could do better at the ends, what I might do is take a tighter radius, which would be the 12 here, for example. I'm going to drop that out. I'm going to put a 12 on for a minute. Sometimes this is what you need to do just to make it work. And then I'm going to put the 12 on there instead, and fire that onto it. Get it in sort of central as I can, and give that a bit of a squeeze. And that can often make the difference. This is leaning a bit to one side, so what I ideally want to do is just get that pad central so the force is down the middle. Again, these things you wouldn't have to contend with if you were using the StewMac. Hello Morris, was that you jumping onto the roof and falling off? Okay, so that's my double whammy. So I'm giving it a 16 and then a bite with a 12 to ensure that the ends are pushed down. Morris is convinced there's the other mouse living down here somewhere, so we're going to make a humane trap later on that I found a how-to video on YouTube from a great instruction channel, but it's a really cool thing. It involves a bottle and a balance, a pivoting bottle that a mouse goes into and then gets caught, because every time he tries to get out the bottle pivots back to closed. That's good. Morris gets a sniff of the super glue and runs for the hills. Okay, so the bottom line is with super glue like that, if it's not in place by now, then it's unlikely to be, and actually that's okay, that's not bad at all. If there is a tiny bit of discrepancy, what you'll find is that it may be that there's a slight rounding on the edge of the fretboard. We haven't completely re-radiused it, I've cleaned it up, but it may still have a slight discrepancy, in which case the fret leveling will take care of that, which is quite a good thing. So I'm just going to switch back, if I can. I'm going to switch back. It's pretty stiff sometimes. I've got a bit of paper on the outside of these brass inserts to keep them from falling out instantly. Sometimes they don't want to come out without a bit of a push. Yeah, so it's just a little homemade thing. So this just kind of keeps it in place, dead center of the block, which is quite useful. And then we can make sure that that's dead center of our clamp device. That also helps to stop it rolling from side to side. Then we'll get the next fret lined up. I was going to say, yeah, that you get a little bit of splurge of super glue when you do this. And you can either clean up at the time if you want to, which I've often done, or spent quite a bit of time doing. But actually, what I've discovered is it's as efficient to leave it all till afterwards, and then you can really clean up well with a very fine, a very sharp blade, and you just scrape the excess off the surface, and you can really tidy up the fret before you get to your kind of final sanding out, polishing, and then oiling the fingerboard. So I'm going to start with the 16 radius. I'm going to push it all in first, and just make sure it rolls or it's sliding properly across the fret, which it isn't. It's off to one side. I'm feeling that this may just be in need of a bit of cleaning, this one. You do get to put quite a lot of pressure on with the clamp there, so you do need to pressure this a little bit. And it will cause the neck a small amount of bend, and I'm kind of supporting it, and I can see it squishing out a bit of glue either side, which is good. And then we'll go for the, oh yeah, the 12 for the edges. Sorry, that was the 16 for the overall flatness. This is a little bit sticky going in here, but I need to hurry along before it all sits. Get in there and get on there. So as you can see, it's entirely doable, but it's not the most convenient arrangement in the entire world. The extra padding I put on this either side of the brass insert is just to help the thing sit flat, and then you can leave it if you want. Sometimes when it rocks, you can just put a bit of pressure on it in a different, just steady it on. But even if it's slightly down to one side, it's still pulling downwards onto the fretboard. So this was a little fret hammer I bought from, I think it's, oh god, something is it GW Wood Supplies in Portugal, and I get a lot of nice templates from those guys. And unfortunately, this one came loose and rattly, but what did I do? I replaced the screw. There's a screw, not on this one. It screws by virtue of this end bit here, and there's a screw in there, and I re-screwed it and resined it to make it stay in place, and it's been fine ever since. And to be honest, it wasn't one of those things that's worth sending back for all the hassle. It's quite good. You can, if you're not careful, you can completely misshape or deform frets even with a little hammer like this. So the fact that it has soft metal on it is kind of deceptive, or the fact it's got brass and plastic. Even with the plastic, you could beat the hell out of the fret until it's the wrong shape. So be careful how you use it. As you can see, I'm using it mainly to get the fret seated before I clamp, so it's kind of a limited usage of it, really. So it doesn't really matter which way I do this. So for example, if I've got the 12 in place at the moment, I could clamp it with the 12 first and then go over it with the 16 second. So just tap it into place first. We go with the 12. Let's just check. Yep, it's a 12, so we're kind of concentrating on the edges first. Edges first, clamp down. It's just leaning off to one side a bit here, so I'll kind of help it a little. Then we'll change it out and just double check it with the 16. But the over radius is great. If you have a slight roll off on the edges, where the fret would otherwise be tempted to sit just a little bit off the fingerboard. It's very difficult to precisely re-radius the fingerboard, I found, because unless you had a machine, your hand never totally mechanically does exactly the same thing with the radius block, and so almost no matter how accurate the radius block is, it is difficult to get it to work all the way through exactly sort of precisely. So I tend to find that we can kind of re-radius to a point, but you still sometimes find just a little bit of variation in it by hand, and also, like I said, sometimes you'll find that the fingerboard has already kind of been rolled off. I think it's people do it deliberately, they kind of roll off the fingerboard, which means sometimes the fret edges can be just a little bit rounder than the rest of it, which means you do have to do that kind of over clamping, and gluing does help as well, hence what I'm doing there. I'm just going to scrape off some of the excess glue that's sitting on this one. I'm going to drive into town shortly, do a couple of little things, but one of the things I'm going to do is going to buy this, buy some 7-Up or something, a 2 litre bottle of 7-Up. Especially, I don't drink this stuff normally, but I'm going to do it especially to make this mouse trap. It's a really elegant little idea, and the guy's gone to such trouble to show a complete how-to video, and it's very simple and straightforward. It'd be an absolute pleasure to make, but it's very elegant in the way it works, and I think I may be short of a couple of things like wing nuts for the design, but it's beautifully elegant, and it's designed to capture your little runaway mouses without doing them any harm, and keep them for you to release at your leisure another day. So that will be the ideal situation. So we're going to do the normal radius first. Oh, forgot to tap it down. It comes undone very easily. Should put some Loctite on it. Sorry, thread lock, I should call it. Loctite is a proprietary brand. Anyway, I wasn't going to bore you with all of this, but this is what I do, and this is how I do it. And I put this under pressure. Not too much, just enough to get it to stay clamped down. Alright, so look, I'm going to carry on, as you can see, get to right to the end, and then I'm going to leave this for the rest of the day. So the glue sets and everything settled, and then I'll do the edging, but I've got quite a few other things to do, including tidying up, because I'm getting a bit messy in here, partly because I'm keeping boxes. This is the box that Dave's Yamaha came in, so I'm keeping that as is. It was a brilliant piece of packaging, absolutely guaranteed that this beauty arrived safe. So I've kept that box, and obviously I'm going to reuse some of the packaging. I'll use some more of my own to get it totally sort of Michelin manned as we go back out. But it's a really great box, but obviously it's taking up room, as is the cardboard and the straw for mice and things like that. So it's all a bit untidy at the moment. I've got 2 guitars coming this evening. One is Carlos Levinson coming back. Something not right with the electrics. It wasn't something right with them when I got it, but I thought I'd taken care of it, but it's not worked, the change out. So I think there might be something wrong with the actual boost circuit, or the wires on the boost circuit, which will need a bit of careful looking at. Quite difficult to find anything even vaguely resembling a Levinson circuit wiring diagram. There is not much. Morris crying to me out there. There's not much of that out there in the world at all. What I can't see very well from here, or I can go around, is whether I'm on the metal on this side, which I am. That's what I want. Here he comes again. Oh, I thought he'd got someone in his jaws this time, but he hasn't. What do you want, Morris? I know what you really want. You want a mouse, don't you? Eh? Yeah. Well, it's in here somewhere. If you can find him, and do like you did yesterday, bring him to me without killing him. That's what I like about you. Yummy isn't so kind, but you're much more gentle with them, much gentler with them. And then you could live in the cage with the other one, and then we could let them both go together. I'm not sure they're... Yikes! Not really sure how sociable they are. Anyway, I'm going to turn this off. Just a little bit of fun. Chinese on micro switches. Rarer than rocking horse poop over here on eBay for some reason, but I got some from China and they came within a week of ordering, which is incredibly quick. Also, fresh in today, this is what a budget maple neck should look like, not that monstrous thing that I had the other day, that yellow thing. This actually has the right kind of shape. I wouldn't be ashamed of putting that on a Strat style guitar. It's not absolutely 100% Fender, but that's fine, we don't want it to be that. As it happens, I'm going to chop this head off and I'm going to use this and refret this. But this brand, K-Mize, is actually very good, and this has put the other brand I tried to shame, and it's reconfirmed that, in fact, K-Mize, I'll just stick to using their stuff because it's that good a basic quality. And as you probably might know, I'm buying them so that I can chop the heads off and refret them and stuff, which seems a bit of a strange thing, but the basic unit, I'm looking for the basic neck structure that's very sound, decent quality, and so what I'm getting is a well-made neck. Actually, the finish on those is so good that many of them I've been able to put on and play straight away without any further adjustment or fret leveling, which is quite something. It's better than you get on many a far more expensive neck, so they really have got something going right at that particular factory. So the reason I was trying some different maple necks is because of the sights regulation. Oh god, sorry, noise. Oh god, sorry, noise. Oh, forgot to switch that off. Oh. Yeah, the sights regulation means that we can no longer sell or trade in forbidden rosewood, a bit like ivory. And I get it, it's about protecting the species and so on and so on and so on. I've not a problem with that at all. But it just means that the stuff that I've been using, the rosewood fingerboards from China, obviously I can sell them within the EU, not that we're going to be members of that for much longer. I can sell them within the EU, but I can't sell them to a US audience or market, which is a shame because it would be nice to be able to sell a custom guitar overseas. How'd you go? Once in a while. So there's no point shutting down one's market. Anyway, so I've been looking to buy some or find some maple necks. The nice thing about the headless ones is I can take any old neck really. This isn't a good example, but I could take any old neck and chop off the grim. It could be an Encore neck. It could be a Johnson neck. It could be a Jim Deacon neck. It doesn't really matter as long as the fingerboard and the neck are good. I can repurpose those and make them work. An example would be, oh, this one isn't done yet. Anyway, this is the really gruesome one I got the other day, but it's no longer what it was. So I've taken off most of the original bright orange Donald Trump lacquer, and I've kind of sanded it down and getting it ready to refret, which will then be lacquered back after that, hand lacquered after that to a nice sort of thick hand done feel. But the basic unit is not bad. I like the grain on it, but the original neck was just so hideous. It was just so completely not what was advertised for starters. And then on top of that, not only wasn't it as shown in the picture, but it had fretting errors, and the lacquer on the fingerboard was damaged in a couple of places. So it was just not worth £30 that I paid for it. Whereas the K-Mize one that I just showed you is the same price, comes all the way from China, and it takes a week or so, whatever. But actually, it's a far better start piece of neck. And of course, I'm not looking to spend £200 on an all parts neck that I'm going to completely refret, re-lacquer, and probably sometimes reshape as well. So I'm looking for the basic 2 pieces of maple in the right dimensions with the fret slots cut in the right place. That's what I'm looking for. So for me, £30 to have a basic unit to start with is pretty good going. Okay, gonna stop for now. We'll come back when I've done the edges of this and it's beveled and then and cleaned up, and then we'll be ready to show you the sort of final details to getting the frets tidied up. There's quite a lot of work still to do. Obviously there's to bevel this to perfection in a little while. Some of it will have to be hand beveled because we won't get the tool up there without damaging the lacquer or the bodywork. So we'll bevel it so that the frets are nicely beveled, and then there's an important bit of rounding off, or just shaping the fret ends so that there's no sharp bits. And then there's some sanding, pre-sanding, then there's putting on some strings, putting it under load, fret leveling it. And during the fret leveling process, not only are we ensuring that these newly laid frets are perfectly level and get the nice low action that we want, but also it's a great opportunity then to just soften off any of these final remaining sharp edges and pay real good close attention to that, so that it has a really nice soft feel to it when Dave comes to play it. So having chosen jumbo frets, it means that we've got quite a bit of, not leeway exactly, but there's room to get the fret leveling right. Sometimes when you're working with a vintage set neck guitar, it can be quite hard to get a really good level in this area when you're laying the frets, partly because you can't get in and clean out the frets quite the way you'd really ideally want to. But with when you're working with jumbo frets, it gives you that a little bit extra room to get it precise, because you've got more metal to play with, so you can kind of push your action lower if you like as well, which is often quite important to people. Not to everybody, but to a lot of people it's very important to get that nice low playing action. And a lovely guitar like this, when you look at some of the old reviews, one of the things people have said historically about this guitar is it ideally had a very nice low fast playing action, so that people like Santana would be firing their amazing lead guitar breaks on it. Anyway, all for now. See you later on. The sun's out. It's very rare in this part of the world, but I'll go out and enjoy it in a minute. See you later. Good morning. Welcome back into, I'm going to do sideways view today. Welcome back to We Love Guitars and Dave's vintage SG2000, and you'll see it here with freshly fretted new frets in there, and pretty much all of any traces of glue have been removed. There are a couple of little bits of glue that I can still get away with a blade, just little tiny bits that tidy up the edge a little bit, but it's otherwise pretty much all done, and you can just sort of run a blade along there and clear out the last little bit. But yeah, refretted. Oop, that's the replacement nut I found, which actually is a vitreous solid plastic, very hard plastic, but it's the nice thing about it is it's a vintage colour, so I'm going to go with that. And it sits quite high at the moment, fits perfectly, but sits quite high upwards, so we've got plenty of room to cut downwards to match up with the fret, the new frets. So what I'm going to do with this thing is I'm going to get ready to do the fret leveling process, but to do that I'm going to restring it, and I'm going to I'm going to do a sort of standard setup from here on. So I've got the old strings ready to use. So the game right now will be to put the bridge back on. Now what I didn't check actually on this, I'll probably look at the picture. Yeah, well, according to that it's that way around anyway, so I didn't double check to see what way around the bridge was, but it's more than likely that way around. So the aim here is to get the strings back on. It's going to take a little bit of bending to get these straightened out, so I won't bore you with that. But I'm going to put the strings back on. I'm going to mark up the tops of the frets with marker pen, ready for this, so that I can level straight onto, I'll do the fret leveling onto there, and I can see what I'm doing. Now I straighten the neck out in order to do the original sanding of the board. So when I put these strings back on and put the neck under load, I'm kind of hoping that the load of the strings will bend it to about the kind of amount of relief that I want. Isn't always the case, so I'll be prepared to make an adjustment before I do the fret leveling, and then I'll do the nut slots at this end. Now to do that, I'll lightly tack the new nut onto the thing with some super glue, but not a lot. It's pretty tight fitting, so I just want to hold it in place. And this is some new stuff. This is some new stuff, and I want to get at it like this. It's not necessarily a good thing, because for some reason, I don't know why, but I've found that when you just take the top off super glue, it seems to walks off on its own volition. I don't know what it is. It is like one of those science fiction creatures of the 60s, like the Blob or something. It just has a mind of its own. Anyway, I'm just quickly lining this up. It's not I mean, there's a millimetre under and over, so I'm getting it as close as I can alignment. It's a pretty good fit though. So I'm just going to take that as my start point. Right, so I'm going to go off camera, I'm going to stretch out the ends of these strings, refit them, put it all on load, and then get it set up, and then I'll get ready to do the fret leveling. Right, just rejoin me. I've set the action at the last fret, and I've put a cap on the first fret before we do the setting the first fret action, just as a sort of test really. And I just want to feel and hear the notes. So pleasantly surprised that the basic fretting is nice. You can see it's playable with the tiniest bit of sizzling here and there, but you tend to find it on the edges anyway, but mostly that is very good. So just playing that through like that before I get the fret leveling stuff going gives me a clear indication of how close to good it already is. So I just need the tiniest of fret levels really on this. I don't need hardly anything. I need hardly anything. I don't need hardly anything. Which is great. That means it's a good fretting from the start. Even though, as always, when you put in new frets, sometimes you get tiny little gaps at the edges and stuff. It's very difficult to get it tight. You can get it airtight or perfect if you do that edge beveling, but I just don't want to do that because of that thing I talked about before about shrinkage and the fact that 6 months down the line you could find the edges which are then razor sharp sticking out. So I've gone just slightly inside of that, and as a result sometimes you get just a tiny little visual separation. But it's going to be fine to play. So what I'm going to do in this process is the next stage is I'm going to set the first fret action, which is currently now too high, which is why I used a capo there. So I've chosen my gauge of files. I'm going to go with an oversized 9 set, which leaves it usable for 10s in future and so on. I'm going to set the first fret action down here any second now, and then once that's set, double check the last fret action. Currently it's about 1.2 here and 1 on the 1.2 the last fret on the low E, which is really low and light, and then 1 millimeter on the top high E, and it as you could hear, even at that action it was playing, right, and that's incredibly low for a guitar like this, so we should be able to get there no problem at all. So the bit I'm going to do now is the first fret action, and I'm just going to drop off these 2 strings and work with the D outwards, and I'm going to go for 0.3. Now if I end up if I end up cutting in deeply into this slot, what I'll end up doing is just dremeling down some of this and reshaping this afterwards, because we don't need this trench for the strings to be in, but I'm using this nut because it has that vintage colour to begin with. So what I'm going to do is just check the scale of the gap. It's about 1 millimetre and some over, so it's way too high. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to open up these these slots first using this triangular file, and while I'm here I'm going to do the same for the other ones, because I know I've got the room to do it, and I don't want to be cutting into a vertical trench, you know, a tight walled trench. I want to, for this point, I just want free access to cut downwards. Then I go for the gauge that I'm working with, and I'm going to just cut confidently backwards at an angle of about 5 to 10 degrees. This is cutting quite predictably, it seems, which is nice. I want it to carry on that way. Bone is my preferred substance, and this is a very vitreous, sort of hard plastic. I don't think it's bone, but it has a vintage sheen to it, which is, or vintage colour, a bit more of an unbleached, I suppose, is the term colour. Anyway, so I'm just cutting backwards and downwards. And as you get into the slot, you can start to get a bit tight. Ideally, obviously, you don't want to be cutting that far into a trench. We will get rid of all that excess material at the end. So I'm just going to carefully, if I can, without going any further down, just widen that out and then double check it. So it's a mixture of using that triangular file and this whatever it is, 32, I think it's 32, 36, whatever, I can't remember what the thing is now. So basically, I'm working my way down to the point where the string just about touches the feeler gauge, which is obviously the 0.3 feeler gauge here. And while it rings out cleanly like that, there's still a little way to go. So we just keep going down until it kind of starts to touch, and you can hear it sizzling or zinging or whatever you want to call it. And then we'll know we're at about the right height. We're nearly there now, and I can see that there's a lot of kind of empty space above it, which we'll take off. It's unnecessary. There we are. Just on the mark. I'm happy with that. So that's putting that one to one side. With the clearances I'm working on, it doesn't have to be absolutely exact. I mean, it's pretty exact. We're talking fractions of a tenth of a millimetre. And I make sure that when I start on the next string, I've got the tension just about at playing tension, because I don't want any chance of the string sitting halfway up the slot. I want it pulling at normal playing tension down to the bottom of the slot to make sure it sits correctly. Sometimes if you don't have the correct tension on, it can sit halfway down, especially in a deep slot while I'm cutting this at the moment. The chances are I can sit halfway down, you get a false reading. You carry on cutting, and what happens is when you put the thing under correct tension, then suddenly it drops right the way to the bottom of a slot which you suddenly cut too deep, which you don't want, obviously. So there's a little bit of widening there, followed by deepening with the correct grade file. For those of you who were interested, I recaptured Hairy Houdini, my rescued shed mouse. The mouse, I should stress that I rescued from Morris's sister, who basically paralysed it from the waist down. They don't have waists. Paralysed the back end of it, and I was able to rescue it and bring it back to health. But he escaped, and so I've recaptured him using a fantastic eco-friendly upcycling mousetrap design, courtesy of the internet, of course, which is the place to go. Back in a second. Okay, so back to the place. It's amazing when you see how far down the action goes when you cut it precisely away from where it was. I mean, this obviously was higher than the original guitar was when I got it from Dave, but because it's a new nut. But actually, it wasn't very spot on. And the worst thing about this guitar nut, or the nut on the previous setup when I got the guitar, is that it was completely binding, and it was just catching the strings constantly. It was pinging all over the place, and as a result it would be totally unstable tuning wise. So this is, not only is this going to set a nice low light action, and the real big difference is this is going to make the tuning stable, and that's the real payoff. Excuse me. That's the real payoff of getting the first the nut slots right. Right, turn this off, save batteries a bit. Okay, so I've got the first three done. First three, the lower three. Now I'm going to work outwards from the top. I'm sort of cheekily listening to the radio in the background because it's the run up to the election, and I'm just interested, stroke confused, stroke who knows what. So it's funny, no, it's not funny, it's the strangest time. I won't go into too much about it because it's a quick way to lose friends and gain enemies, but all I'll say is I just find it completely confusing. I'm not a binary person, and well, I'm not somebody who's ever fallen into a party way of thinking. I just I can't do it. I don't have an allegiance to one that I can just hold on to, and whatever they do I can still come back to it. And, you know, in some ways I envy people who can, because it must be quite nice to go, I'm a Labour person, or I'm a Tory through and through. But it's not something I've ever been able to do. So, bottom line is, right now, I don't know what I'd vote tomorrow. And I find that in itself worries me. Well, it's telling. I don't at all like being in that situation. I think that's a revealing place to be. Well, that tells me all I need to know about where we're at, or where I'm at, I should say. Not we. Can't pronounce for everyone else, but certainly for me. Anyway, so yeah, don't know. I'll have to really think hard about it on the way up to the polling booth. I will go and vote. Just don't know where I'll cast it. I don't know. I'm not going to get into it. Too many polarized views, or too many fixed views to have a productive discussion about it. And besides, you can't have a discussion with just one person in a shed. It's a complete monologue. I just don't know. Right, we're on the mark there. That's great. Right down to the level. 0.3 is a really low action. Okay. Bit of cutting down with this one. Anyway, yeah, so good luck to you voting with your consciences tomorrow. I hope you find it easier than I'm finding it. That's all I can say. Anyway, by the time you see this, it will be long past tomorrow. It'll already be done and dusted. I think, I guess the simplest way of saying it would be just on a snap reaction. There's not a party that, there isn't a party that stands for my outlook on life or what I believe in. Quote, I don't mean as in religions, because I don't have any such of that, but when I say believe in, just my philosophical take on life or whatever. So there's no parties that even come close to representing my views, which is odd. So then what do? You go for, theoretically you go for what's closest. And then I try and think, well, okay, what is closest? And actually I still don't know really. Well, I might know. I think maybe the Green Party might be closest. But then that's suddenly becomes single issue. It's closest. Why? Because there's a concern for the environment. Well, good. I'm with you on that, Greens. But you know, is that in and of itself the basis for you know, running a country? Well, it depends, I guess. If the state of the environment actually is impactful enough on everything we do, then I guess there's a strong argument that it is the most important single determining factor, because everything should follow from keeping our planet alive and a sustainable approach to running our country and the way we live. But as you probably see, I don't think that's a priority. But hence the size or scale of the Green Party is what it is. But yeah, I don't know. Really interesting time for me anyway. Don't know what I'm going to do. I guess you can always just go, well, would I vote Tory? Why? I don't know. Would I vote Labour? Why? I don't know. I think there's been quite a focus on the radio this morning about how people seem to be very adept or well versed in, when asked what's good about Theresa May or Jeremy Corbyn, people seem to more and more, or increasingly, only be able to reply in the terms of what's crap about the other, as opposed to selling what's good about the one they claim to support. And that's a funny place to be. You know, people just don't seem to give a solid list of what's good. It's a kind of less bad option or thinking. I just find that really strange. Anyway, I don't know. That's on the mark, that one. Really nice and low. So this good thing so far is this plastic is working well, cutting. Fingers crossed. Anyway, who knows? Who knows? Who knows? Who knows? It'll be what it'll be, and we shall see. I think there's another angle on it, and I think this might be a view shared by a lot of people, possibly younger people as well, and that is, if you were to ask me, regardless of who wins the general election tomorrow, do I think it's the essential trajectory of this country will change for the better as a result of any of the parties being elected? I think my answer is probably I don't think so, and I wonder, I have a feeling that's probably more common a view. This is sort of resignation. I suspect it's what puts a lot of people off from voting. That sort of futility, or a bit of futility that it's expressed sometimes as there's not enough difference between them, or you know, they're really essentially all working for the same thing, which is free market capitalism and the status quo, more or less, just different versions of the status quo. And I think it could be why, you know, some aspects of Corbyn's Labour, or Corbyn and Labour, are quite attractive to people who really do want something different to believe in, because I think it appeals to a belief that there could be some radical change, which of course, you know, frightens a lot of people who have vested interest in the status quo. But I guess, you know, if you're a young person with absolutely no chance of getting on a property ladder and so on and so on, why wouldn't you want it all to come crashing down, and then there's nothing in it for you? as it stands. Thank you, love.
You still talking about mouses?
No, I'm talking about politics without trying to make enemies.
What is it they tell you not to talk about?
Don't work with animals, politicians, family members. No, I'm just saying that, you know, I'm not ashamed to say that none of the parties stand for the kind of philosophical things that matter to me, which is kind of, I don't know if they're ever supposed to, but some people seem to find they do, and it's quite comforting for them that a party stands for, you know, they identify really strongly with it and can give their all to it. But
that's what Matthew Wright was saying this morning. He was asking if you haven't decided what to vote today, what are you going to do?
Yeah.
And somebody phoned and said, I've voted every year all my life, I'm 70, and I don't know who to vote for now. Because I like some of the things, and Yasmin Annabelle Brown, surprisingly, because I'm not
a fan of hers,
but she said, if you want the NHS, vote for whoever's doing the best thing for the NHS, which is Labour, isn't it? So it's kind of, you know, go for one policy that you do like. But, you know, I don't believe anything they say. I don't believe they'll do it.
No, well, I'm not even sure that, I kind of believe they all mean it. I just think that the reality of execution always hits, and I think the situations are so complex that it's probably beyond their ability to deliver.
That's why I think Lib Dem's got such a rough ride about the student thing, because, you know, the reality of trying to change a more powerful party, which was...
What do you mean, the student loans?
Yeah, I don't, you know, anyway.
Yeah, don't talk politics with your family even.
No. Anyway, I still don't know who I'm going to vote for.
My dad's a Trump fan, let's just leave it at that.
He's going to vote for Trump, is he?
Yeah, in the general election.
I don't know who I'm going to vote for.
I don't know either. And I'm not going to tell you because it's secret.
I don't even know about the tactical vote thing. I don't know.
We'll decide on our way up to the polling station tomorrow, like we always do.
It's a conservative area, isn't it? Jeffrey Cox.
Yeah. Well, it's
like
countryside. We're
big fat farmer.
Shh, that's rude.
Well, just saying.
I know. But anyway, no.
Slightly rotund.
Yeah, a ruddy-faced, hale and hearty farmer. But yeah, who knows? I don't want fox hunting, thank you.
Not in our backyard.
Not in my backyard. Look at me.
Come by.
I want the party that supports rescuing mice.
We have fox hunting.
We have, well, the hunt comes and shouts and curses and screams in the field opposite us. It's really distressing.
Such a noise.
Yeah, and they all look really angry.
Imagine what it's like for the fox.
Yeah. I'll take refuge. You can take refuge in here. Right.
Anyway.
Fret leveling. Here we go.
Get on with your entertaining your.
Thank you, darlings. See you in a bit.
It's a good platform for you.
No, I'm going to be a bit careful about limited views.
You don't want
limited liability. Anyway, we won't talk about politics anymore. I'll just listen to it in the background. So I've just tuned my fret leveling tool to the curvature of this neck, or the relief, shall we call it. And now I'm going to very lightly, under the weight of His Majesty's gravity, I'm just going to let the tool just work on to the top of the frets where they're high, if and when and where they're high. And excuse me. And it's very, very marginal, or very little needed here, and I can see already there's a couple of mildly high frets there, and that's about the lot. So I suspect that will be enough for the what I would call the E track, which is where the E string sits. Tiny little bit more, absolutely tiny bit more at that end, but it really is really minor. So that's really good. So I mean, it's good mainly because it means the frets are level to begin with, which is very satisfying. But it's good because it means we get the playing action we want with a minimum of fret material removal to level frets, and that's just fret metal equals playing life. So that's always a good thing. And like I say, often when you've got a little overhang on your frets because you're overhanging a binding, it's quite often, or it's quite common, that the end bit, just because of the way it cuts when you use the pliers, the end bit sometimes sits just marginally out of the curve. That's good. So I kind of expect the very edges to occasionally need a little bit more leveling than the areas in the middle. It tends to speed up towards the centre normally. Anyway, it's not universal, but so again, just a gentle leveling. Bearing in mind that the frets that previously were a little bit needed a little bit of work at the edges are probably still going to be possibly a little high, but they won't be as high as you come in towards the centre, because it's usually the edges that are a bit more extreme. So I'm looking for how each note, there you go. Now actually that isn't fret buzz, that's bridge rattle. And you've got to be able to spot the difference. Actually, it's sometimes I've had people in the past, unfortunately, kind of very rare, but once at least in the past, somebody's come back to me and said that a guitar's, I mean, sometimes the guitar has buzzed because I've sent it out before the truss rod has settled or something, and it's then ended up not being effectively being too low or too flat for the leveling that I gave it. But anyway, sometimes people get confused and they think something's got fret buzz when in fact it's bridge buzz or bridge rattle, and it's hard to tell the difference sometimes. But I could put my finger on the back of that and stop it doing that. So, and it's good because again, knowing that it's likely to do that will save me from just carrying on taking away fret material unnecessarily, chasing a kind of trying to eradicate a buzz that actually isn't in the frets. It's in the bridge, so that could be very costly, obviously, as you can imagine. Doesn't need explaining too much. So like I say, what I'm finding down here is everything's cutting nicely, and the couple of frets that are a little higher are cutting a little bit more. Also what's happening here is we're getting a little bit more cutting here, which is what I expect, because this is where the end of the, if you think of a sickle, which is a handle followed by a curved blade, to me the Les Paul style neck is like a handle and a sickle blade, meaning that you get the curve of the truss rod applies here, but because of the thickness of the neck here and the way it's, especially on a Les Paul, but to some degree here, its thickness certainly, and on a Les Paul particularly, the way it's bolted or glued to a solid lump of wood, it means generally this area here is stiffer, and what you get, because of the stiffness, the flatness of this, because it doesn't respond to the truss rod, followed by whatever little bit of curvature you've got in here, you effectively create a little bit of a knuckle, you could call it, where the handle joins the blade of the scythe right there. And if you can see it from what I'm seeing, there's a few frets here starting to cut, and what's happening is my nice curved truss rod is following the curve that this whole thing should have, and it's ignoring, because the truss rod can't recreate this congestion here. So what the truss rod is doing now, the gentle curve, it's gently scalloping to a very small amount. It's gently imposing its curve onto these frets here. That's instead of what other people do, which is called some people call, or some people do call, called fall away, where they start from about here and they kind of file everything in a backward gradient, so that you sort of, whatever's happening here, you pretty much guarantee that the next fret is lower than the one before it, and so on and so on. Well, the nice thing about the method I use is it doesn't need to do that, because the curve of this is just elegant enough and gentle enough to iron out that slightly congested bit there. And it obviously, the more curved the first part of the neck is, or the bigger part of the neck, the more curved it is, the more pronounced the point where the handle joins the blade will be. And in this case, it's I've lowered or reduced the amount of curve in the neck, because we don't need that much. I've reduced the amount of curvature, which means I've also reduced the kind of impact of the two different planes coming together there. Now if they're very extreme you get a place, but mine's leveled it out, so it's just a little, it's like a little blip on the curve, which, as I say, this truss rod is gently ironing out, which is why it's such an elegant, one of the many reasons why I think it's such a nifty and elegant little method. There's another one, another of the reasons. Well, first reason it's a bit more accurate. Second reason, for reasons I'm not going to go into, but I've said something a million times on many videos. Second reason, it's because it allows me to stop and play the strings and literally stop leveling when I've got the strings all playing the way I want. Third reason is it elegantly scoops out, or just irons out, the handle blade join, as I call it. And believe it or not, there's another reason, which I don't often mention, and that is because of its thinness, about what, 5mm wide, it respects a curved radius or a compound radius, one that changes from that to that at the end, because you're doing it in very thin samples or tangents across a curve as you go around. This thinness is advantageous because it means you kind of sample that curve in multiple slices, as opposed to imposing a great flat 1-inch fret leveling file on it, which I used to do once upon a time, and that would kind of, by definition, run the risk of ironing out actually ironing out the curve of the radius, but also kind of ironing out any compound radius, the subtlety of a compound radius. So this thing respects the compound radius and the radius generally much better. And if it was a digital process, you could say the thinness of this leveling beam, as well as its curvature, but the thinness alone lets you take multiple samples across the curvature of the guitar's radius, if you get what I mean. And you can see that obviously I work on each string track, but I blend across, so I overlap a little bit to the previous slice, tangent, or whatever, so I'm kind of overlapping them in a bit of a curve. But it's much more, it's a much more precise, accurate sample, if you like, because of the number of segments I'm mapping the curve with. Much more, it's a much smoother representation, like a digital photograph with more sample resolution. Or a bitmap with higher resolution, or a scan with a greater resolution. Anyway, that's a bit esoteric, going off into comparisons with digital, but those of you who do digital stuff will kind of know what I mean. It's just, there are more points in the sample of this curve when you use a very thin. I'm still seeing it. I got a Stuart catalogue through the other day, and they still show, I'll grab this thing in a second, they still have for sale a file that they sell that looks like, I don't know what it looks like. Where's it gone now? I've put it somewhere and lost it. Okay, well, it isn't the right thing, but maybe it's in here. Come on. What are these? Hey! Found me some blades. Anyway, it's not the right thing because it's somewhere else at the moment. But Stuart sells a kind of diamond coated metal plate, and it says ideal for fret leveling, and they show it sitting on top. Now obviously it's not as thick as this, it's only about 3mm thick, and I've got one for sharpening my whatever's, chisels, but anyway, so they show it sitting on top of the frets. Now imagine you've got a radius like this, imagine how well that flat edge respects a radius, doesn't it? It just will iron its flat zero radius into it, or it's not zero, it's kind of an infinity. If 9 is tight, you know, 16 is flat, 12, 16 like this is flatter, so this is going to be an infinity radius. But But you know, I can't believe they still show that sitting on in a photograph. The diamond coated thing suggesting that you would level your frets with it. Mad. But even standard files, which you can get great results out of, but even that's what, nearly four times, no, 3 times, at least 3 times, possibly nearly 4 times the width of that. So which is going to give which is going to take more snapshots of the curve, this one or that one. So we know which one it is. So anyway, that's another one of the other. Actually, I won't put it last in the list, but it's probably not even the kind of side benefits. It's probably one of the most important ones, but it's just one of the many reasons why I use this method. So there. And of course, it's one of those things that sometimes when people drop in on your YouTube channel and something strikes them as unusual, or they don't understand why you're doing it, they haven't got time or the energy to find out these multiple reasons, so they just rant about it and go away not knowing any better, which is a shame, because it was a great revelation to but learn how to do it this way. You know, and some, I think I probably changed over to this method at around about 60, 70, 80 setups. So around 350, 360 setups later, I'm pretty confident in how it works and how to work it. So now this is showing me there's a couple of frets that are sitting up at this top edge here, which is fine because I'm taking them back to make sure there's absolutely no obstruction. But even this amount of leveling on those is minor, really, on a brand new set of jumbo frets. So these are going to, once these are polished up, they're going to feel absolutely big and chunky. There's an interesting kind of almost discussion that I was starting to have with Malcolm, my friend Malcolm, who was over here the other day, about the Yamaha nut system, and I'm still waiting to be shown an argument that makes sense to me for that. I won't go into it now because without drawing things it doesn't make any sense, and it's too easy to misconstrue what I'm saying or what I'm trying to communicate. But suffice to say, I don't get it, and I don't, from everything, well, it's not so much I don't get it, well it is I don't get it. I don't get it, and with what I've done here, and you know, this is the standard setup that I've shown in my ebook. From what I've done here, this guitar will play beautifully in tune. The action here will be great. There'll be no intonation issues caused by having to press too hard for the first fret, which you get on many guitars. The intonation here will be set, and that'll be fine for this neck, compensated for each of these strings, which is what we do. And this guitar will play and sound great. So there's no problem. I honestly don't see it's a fix without a problem, as far as I can see. Now I'm not saying that it isn't. It isn't the case that it's a genuine fix for something, but I can't see what the problem is that it claims to fix. Certainly not with what I'm doing here. Anyway, that's just where I'll leave it. But and if I have to say, if the benefits are so marginal that they're both almost impossible to explain and practically impossible to demonstrate, and I have to say this is where we get into an almost kind of, you can change the word benefits to existence of God or something, you know, anything in my world that I'm not convinced about. If you can't articulate exactly what it is and then show me the evidence that's, you know, completely objectively makes objective sense, thank you. You know, if you can't do that, then I'm just not going to, it doesn't really mean anything to me. But there we go. So as yet I haven't run into the problem that the Yamaha will theoretically fix. which is fine because it's £30. It's a lot of money for fixing a problem that I haven't noticed I've got. There we are. I'm just going to check these in a minute because I don't know if they feel loose or something. But anyway, so that's here we are back to that place where we have this off. We've got some dust kicked up now, which I'll just gently wipe off with this damp cloth, just to clear off some of the dust off the surface of the fingerboard. What I will do next is I'll take the Dremel and I'm going to basically Dremel down this plastic nut to a shape that leaves just a little bit sticking up. So I'm going to go off camera to do that because it'll just be noisy. I'll know very straight away if it's bone or not because of the smell, but if it's just plastic then it'll just fire plastic dust everywhere. So I'll see you in a minute when that's done. Then after that I'm going to re-crown or reprofile these frets because some of them have a little bit of a flat spot now from the leveling, which is correct, which is what we expected. The next stage will be to paint them all over again with marker pen and then just use the Stuart fret crowning tool or reprofiling file to reshape these without, most crucially, without lowering their level. Having gone to all of that hard work to lay them, to press them in as well as I could, and then leveling them out with that process you just saw, the last thing we want to do is take a file like this and lower them and create some more inconsistency between them. So this nice thing about the file in conjunction with this marker pen is it allows us to just take off the edges of the flat spot and kind of wear it down a little bit, but leave a tiny thin strip of black marker on, which, providing I can do that pretty much with all the frets, it tells me that I haven't touched the tops of them, which means they're all at the same relative level that we just achieved. So that's what I'm aiming for. So I'll come back when I've done that, and I'll be ready to do the polishing section. Okay, lowered magically. It's not bone, it is plastic, but it's a nice hard plastic, so I can live with it. I will say that I have not measured or noticed a significant difference between a good solidly fitted hard plastic nut and a bone one. I'm not saying there isn't a difference, but I can't measure it or detect it, so in this case I'm quite happy to stay with the plastic because in this case it's the right colour for this guitar, and it's also cut nicely and it's gone to the right first fret action, and it's also, the strings are running smoothly or cleanly through it. Now if when we come to string it up there's any issue getting it, there's any pinging or binding issue, then I might reconsider, but right now it's earning its keep, shall we say. Now I'm just whizzing through this. This is quite quick because there really wasn't an awful lot being taken off these frets, so they're pretty much doing in the first swipe of this tool, where I get to a slightly flattened bit I have to stop and do a little bit more work, but it's hardly any to have to work on, so it's very good. And then once this is done, the next job will be to cover up the whole of the fretboard and the top part of the guitar with masking tape, and then I'm going to sand out all these frets through a series of grades of paper, and to the point where we have a nice shiny new frets ready to play. And while we're doing the sanding out and polishing the frets, I'll also just round off the edges with sandpaper as well, so just to soften them up. They've been rounded off with files, they've been tidied up with files, but the last bit will be in the sanding process. So what I'll do is I'll get me some masking tape and embark on a process of masking off. Now this is an older guitar, and I'm going to be careful to make sure I'm using the low tack masking tape, and I'm also I'm going to, this is slightly damp actually, I'm also going to do a double precaution of just dabbing the tape onto some cloth or the towel here before I put it on, because what I don't want to have happen, I want it to stick and protect the fretboard like this, but I don't want it to grip too much to the lacquer on the underside, so I want to kind of just lessen, even though it's already low tack this stuff, I just want to sort of lessen off its gripping power, and it just needs to hold enough. With a newer, more modern guitar, I'm less cautious in that way, but with older guitars you don't know really about the state of the lacquer. Sometimes it could be ready just to fall off. Difficult to do this part of the job without protecting the fingerboard this way. I'm trying to minimise, it. Anyway, so the next part of this takes about half an hour. I'm not counting the time. I've got to cut lots of thin strips of tape to get down to all these frets, so that's a bit dreary but necessary. So I'll do all of that. I will polish out all these frets going through the series of papers from I'm going to go 600, 1000, 1500, and then I'm going to run through a micro mesh set which goes from 1500 through to 12,000, and then I'll finish off with some Autosol chrome polisher just to get a sheen to these. Now once that's done, pretty much all the setup work, the harder part of the setup work, is done, because the action is set. We've got it, the height we want it, we've got the nut action correct, we've got the relief we want in the neck, and we've made the frets comply with that. Once that's done, then really the only issue then is to give the rest of the guitar a clean, and get ready to string it. So these basically can go away for now. Yeah, we'll get ready to string it, load it back up with some new strings. Oh, sorry, I forgot. We'll before I string it and after I've done the fret polishing, I'm going to give it 2 or 3 drinkings of fingerboard, of lemon oil on the fingerboard, just because having done a bit of a polishing, sanding on the fretboard and using some solvent to clean it and stuff, it can just take some of the oils out of it. So I'll give it a drink. It's kind of it's an ebony board anyway, so it's pretty dark anyway. It doesn't look dried out, but I'll give it a couple of drinks just to be fair. So I'll leave it for a couple of hours to let that soak in, and then I'll restring it a bit later on today. In the meantime, I'll get on with another guitar, or after that, I'll get on with another guitar, which will be Paul's. This is falling apart. I need another piece of wood, or I need to use the other side of this. What's free? Let's use this side. Let's chuck this over the other side. Yeah. So after this, while the oil is soaking into the fingerboard, I'll do a setup on Paul's Tanglewood. I've forgotten the model number. Semi-acoustic Tanglewood, and it looks like a nice basic semi-acoustic, but it doesn't play well at all at the moment, and it's absolutely not staying in tune. This doesn't look like there's not quite enough room to do this. Cutting on here. Anyway, so let me save your time. I'll switch off and I'll see you in a minute. Well, actually, I'll see you a bit later when I'm ready to restring. Yeah. Well, yes. Welcome back. And what a mug I feel. I've just been for a walk about a quarter of a mile away from the house with my 2 mice in a fish tank thing, mouse tank, to release them, set them free after all my hard work of both trapping them and preserving them from the cats so they don't get killed and so on. So I get to the riverbank where I'm going to release them. And I get all kind of settled down, get myself the video camera rolling, and gently gently start to take out, I forgot what colour's first, blue isn't it? Gently start to take out the straw, so that I'm expecting to see the mice at the bottom of the tank, and keep going, and I'm going, wait a minute, what is going on here? And I get to the end and there's nothing, absolutely nothing in the tank, and I'm just completely, I was amazed. I thought, I just sat there looking at it, thought my family has played a trick on me. You know, somebody, Thomas or Claire, has come in and for the hell of it they've taken out one of these, or taken out these creatures and hidden them away just to make me think I'm going mad. And I thought, no, nobody would waste their time doing that. So I kind of just sat there thinking, how did this happen? And I was just mulling it over and looking over the cage when I noticed that the little bars on the side of the little plastic bars on the side of the cage at the very top had been chewed through, just big enough to allow a mouse to escape. In fact, actually bigger than a mouse needs to escape. So it's like the little fella had enough time to cut himself free and cut a bit more for just for the sheer fun of it. Anyway, so of course that's where they went, and that's where both of them went this morning. After, well, one of them must have gone last night after I put him in, and the other one would have gone some, oh, I don't know. Anyway, what it is, there we have it. The two mice are probably still here in the shed. I went for a walk with an empty cage and got all set up with video to video myself releasing fresh air, and now I've had to put down the trap again. I don't even know why I'm bothered, but this time of course I won't end up putting them in, they won't be in the cage thing, because the cage thing is knackered. It will be, if I catch one at all, it will be in the bottle, and then I'll have to take it straight down the fields again and release them. If I catch two, one each night or something, that'll be one each day. But, yeah, very funny. Shows what a soft-hearted Egypt I am. There we are. Anyway, that aside, I've come back from my nice walk in the country to the SG2000, and here I am just getting ready to well, just stringing it up now. The frets look and feel great. I'm just going to string up. I'm putting hybrid 9s on this because I think it was 9s on before, as far as I could feel. I think hybrid 9s will go well with it. And yeah, so after this I'm going to be doing the Tanglewood, which is hanging up, oh no, it's on the stand on the floor down there. I'll be doing Paul's Tanglewood next, which will be quite interesting because it's pretty hard to play guitar as it stands. Mind you, so was this Yamaha. It was not at all well set up. Anyhow, so this, I think the action on this may have moved slightly while I was doing the last of the fret stuff, so I'll need to just double check the action before I tighten everything up. I don't want to be trying to hand crank that thumb wheel down there with the thing under full tension. I don't have one of the Gibson lift tools that you can use to wind down, so I tend to have to sort of get it right with the pressure off, loading off, and then sort of do it and then put the strings on. So yeah, I felt for once in my life I felt completely at a loss. I had no idea where the mice had gone. I thought this is impossible. They really have done a Harry Houdini trick on me. But of course, what I realised is that the black stuff on the shelf behind the cage that I'd taken for mouse droppings is in fact not mouse droppings. It is chewed plastic from where the little critter escaped, cut his way through. But good for them, is all I can say. Well done them. I'm just looking at this thing a second. Actually, this bridge is back to front. Judging by well, it's back to front judging by the slots on here, so I'm going to take this off. Although it's not back to front judging by the stagger pattern, so that's a bit odd. But let's go with what common sense tells us. Sorry about this. Rewind. I'm just looking at the slots on top of the saddles. Tell me this should be the other way around. I was going by the actual pattern, the normal pattern of the the thingies, but in fact it looks like it should be the other way around, which is quite rare. Is it rare? Maybe not. No, let's get this right. No, it is rare. What we've got is the screws at the back, which isn't that common, although it's the way I prefer it. It just means they're easier. I find them easier to adjust, but it makes the stagger pattern is a little bit not quite the same, but that's okay. I'll go with the easy positioning of the screws for adjusting. Fine by me. But it's the size of the slot that caught my attention there. Made me realise it was the wrong way around. Okay. So, not a lot to do now. Like I say before, the hard work is all in the levelling and the setting of the action to begin with. So it's kind of done. The difficult stuff is done earlier in the process, really. Now it's a case of tuning up, bleeding out any slack in the strings, and then making sure the intonation is set right, and then checking as we do this sort of tuning up, just checking very carefully for any pinging from the nut, because the most important thing for tuning stability, really, well, two things. One is that the strings run freely through the nut slot, and the second one is that all the slack is pulled out of the strings first, which is kind of rare. It almost never is. So I do my very best to make sure that's the case before it goes back, and often it costs me a top E string in the process because you know, how did that happen? I've gone underneath some strings. What? Hey, let's try that again. Yeah, I often end up breaking the E strings while I'm doing the stretching, but that's why I like the rotor sound, because they give me a spare to work with. Anyway, so right now the pop bottle mousetrap is back under the desk, under the workbench here. I doubt they'll come out now wherever they are, but it certainly worked yesterday because there was one in there. Whether the mouse will be silly enough to fall for the same trap twice is anyone's guess. I don't know the answer to that. We shall see. It's tilted up nicely, waiting for another little visitor to come and get some peanut butter. But it was nice that it worked in the first place, and even if I can't use that stupid 8-pound plastic tank that is now useless, at least I can use my recycled pop bottle mousetrap, which is somehow strangely pleasing. The thing that didn't cost anything is the thing that works. Anyway, so straight off, first thing I'm going to do is just bend out all quite a bit of as much of the slack as I can out of these strings. The ends of the frets are nicely rounded off too. Got a good chance to soften them off with sandpaper as I went through the sanding process. And we finished up with Autosol chrome cleaner as well, which put a nice extra shine on the frets. I mean, it doesn't last, that last mirror shine doesn't last more than a few days, to be honest. It's kind of a temporary thing, so whether it's still on there when Dave gets still gleaming the same way when Dave gets this back is another matter, because he's currently on vacation, but it's nice to do anyway. Now this is because I've changed the action. So before I do too much full tightening, let me just thumb wheel this action back into shape, because currently it's flat on the deck on both sides, so get it close to where we want to be, just over 1.5. Just over 1, go down 1.2. It's not a bad start point. Let's see what we get with that. If it doesn't work, we can always come down a bit further, so carry up a bit further. So no pinging or anything from the nut slots while we're tuning up, which is a really good sign. So that means that the strings pass cleanly through there without any resistance. So with a low action, what it also means is that the pickups now are too close to the strings, or the strings now are too close to the pickups. So I need to adjust the pickups down a little bit, giving this a bit of a upward pull, and then we'll do some more sideways stretching again to get as much of the slack out as possible before we go to play it. But the action is fabulous compared to where it was before, really light. And you know, I've said this many a time that the amount of difference in this will be, it'll be a different guitar. So it's a positive, but sometimes I feel like I need to warn customers that for a guitar, I mean, in a sense this is not quite the case because Dave's recently acquired this, I believe, but when it's a guitar that's, let's say somebody had played for 30 years and worn it out, and now they wanted it refretting and setting up like this, the feel is so radically different that they kind of really need to be warned. So it might still take a couple of tweaks. As I say, 1.1 millimeters is very, very low, and I may opt to go a tiny bit up on this. Hardly any relief in there at all. So we are challenging this very. I mean, it plays, but there's a little bit more. I don't know if that's actually, could well be hitting the pickups down here. I might want to go a tiny bit up on. I can do it on the bridge, amazingly. A tiny fraction up, and then I'll go move the pickups down a little bit. 2 on one on the other side. Is it moving? That's the question. Yeah, I think so. It's nice. It's behaving, which is good. Okay. And then I'll also take this one down a little fraction too. can hear sometimes bits of the bridge rattling, as I said before, so you have to kind of keep an eye out for that. Sometimes it's worth using a dab of glue or something just to stop it rattling, or sometimes I use rubber. The action there is very low still. Got my spectacles on. Okay, I'm going to play this a little bit. Right, I'm going to leave it settle with the strings on for a while. I'm going to move to another guitar. That's all good. Nice new jumbo frets on there, ready to go. Might do a tiny tweak of the truss rod, miniature tweak of the truss rod. But apart from that, it's pretty good. It's all where I want it to be. So I'm going to move on. I'll see you again. Move on with another one. Back in a second.